The raw file from my total station showed 2 full traverses mine and another one that ran the same corridor 12 hours earlier, down to the same station points. The problem was simple. Nobody else was out there, and the sand around every point was untouched. I'm not new to working alone in places people don't go. I've been a land surveyor for 12 years, mostly boundary retracements and right-of-way corridors, BLM land, tribal adjacency where we're supposed to keep our hands to ourselves, and enough pipeline and transmission work that my knees pop when I squat. I'm the guy on a crew who checks closure before lunch and again before we pack up because a close enough shot turns into a lawsuit a year later. That week in southeastern Utah, we were on a corridor job tied to a proposed utility alignment that had to skirt cultural sites and stay inside a narrow, approved band. The map looked clean in the office. On the ground, it never is. It was late spring, May 17th, 2024, when we rolled out of Blanding before sunrise. You could feel the day warming even in the dark. Dust hung low on the road, and the headlights caught it in that thin, drifting way that makes you think of smoke. My partner on this one was Cal. He'd been running instruments about as long as I had. Cal was skeptical, the way good surveyors are skeptical. He didn't get spooked easily, and he didn't accept stories. If something was wrong, he wanted a number, a file, a setting, or a mechanical reason. Our gear was standard for this kind of work. A robotic total station with active tracking, 2 prisms on poles, a data collector with our templates loaded, tripods, tri-bracks, extra batteries, rebar with caps, lath, and pin flags, mag nails for hard rock, and a printed set of plats in a folder because batteries die and screens lie. We had a handheld GPS unit too, not for final, just for quick orientation when the landscape starts looking the same in every direction. In the truck bed we had a shovel and a rock bar, because you don't always get soil deep enough for rebar out there. The job was simple on paper. Establish control, run a traverse along the corridor center line, set stationing stakes at specified intervals, and flag anything that looked like it would turn into a fight later washes, slick rock shelves, anything that would force a redesign. We weren't the engineers. We were the ones who made the line real. A little after 7 in the morning, we stopped at a fuel station on the edge of town that mostly served ranch trucks and oil field rigs coming up from the south. The clerk behind the counter looked like he'd been up all night. He watched us pick up ice and a couple of breakfast burritos. With the same tired attention, he probably gave everything. He saw the rolled plats in my hand and the hard hats on the dash and asked where we were headed. I said, BLM corridor work, out toward Bears Ears. His face didn't change much, but his eyes did the thing locals do when they're deciding whether to say something. He nodded once and said, Don't leave your markers overnight. I told him we weren't planning to. We had a long day and a drive back. He didn't argue, just repeated it like it was a safety rule. Don't leave your markers overnight, he said again. People mess with them. That was a normal warning. People do mess with stakes. I've had lath ripped out by bored teenagers and rebar pulled by guys who think they're defending their backyard. I've had cattle knock them over and coyotes chew flagging because it flutters. We thanked him and left. About an hour later, we hit the BLM access road. It was a washboard dirt track that cut through juniper and pinyon, then opened into a broad stretch of red sand and slick rock benches. The air smelled like sun-warmed stone and dry brush. The ground had that crusty, fragile look where you can tell there's living soil you're not supposed to grind into powder. We stayed on existing tracks. There was a posted sign at the corridor entrance, bolted to a metal post. Cultural sensitivity area. Do not disturb markers. That was more about potsherds and sites than about survey stakes, but it stuck in my mind. A lot of people put a lot of meaning into markers out there, and it's not always about our work. Cal read the sign out loud in a flat voice like it was a checklist item, then said, You think that guy meant hikers or locals? Could be either, I said. Could be nothing. We parked on a flat patch near the start point and did what we always do. Tripod out, legs set, head leveled, instrument mounted. I took a back sight on our first control point, checked the prism height, entered it in the collector, verified our job file, and shot a quick check to see if our control matched the published coordinates within tolerance. Everything looked clean. Cal was running the rod for the first hour, moving ahead while I shot. The sun came up fast. By 9 in the morning it was already warm enough that you could see heat shimmer above dark rock. A raven worked the air over a distant ridge, silent except for the occasional harsh croak when it dipped low. We moved like we always do. Set up, shoot, move, repeat. We'd pick a station location with good lines of sight, mark it, then shoot forward along the corridor. Every time we set a lath, I'd write stationing on it with a marker, big, readable, the way it's supposed to be. Cal would flag it and double-check the spacing with the collector. By late morning, we were in the rhythm where you stop thinking about it as a day and start thinking about it as a sequence of setups. Surveying is a job that punishes impatience. You can't rush angles and you can't lie to a level bubble. You can only keep moving and keep checking. Around noon, we reached a shallow wash where the corridor crossed a sandy bend and climbed up onto a slick rock shelf. We took lunch in the shade of the truck because it was the only shade around. The wind had picked up and it carried fine grit that found its way into everything, your teeth, your water bottle threads, the hinge of the data collector case. Cal was chewing on a protein bar and scrolling through the shot list. Everything's clean, he said. Closure's tight. Good, I said and meant it. Let's keep it that way. We went back out. The afternoon was the part of the day where mistakes happen if you let yourself get lazy. The light gets harsh and flat. The ground starts looking like every other patch of ground. The line of the corridor tries to pull your attention away from your surroundings. That's when people walk into a wash and twist an ankle, or step into an old cattle hole and go down hard. We were about another hour into the afternoon when the first wrong thing happened. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of wrong that makes you pause and look twice, then look at your notes, then look again. We came back around a bend where we'd set 3 stakes earlier that morning, stationing points at regular intervals along the center line. I remembered them because I'd driven rebar into a patch of stubborn soil and it took longer than it should have. The lath should have been easy to spot, bright flagging, fresh writing. I didn't see them where they should have been. I saw them a few feet off. At first I thought I'd misremembered the placement. It happens. You think you set something on the edge of a rock when you actually set it beside a shrub. Human memory is not a measuring device. But then I saw the next one. Same issue. And the next one. All 3 were offset in the same direction, like someone had picked them up and nudged them over, then tamped the soil down again. Cal stopped and looked, then looked back along the line. That's weird, he said, no fear in his voice, just annoyance. Wind? I said, even though rebar doesn't blow over. Cattle? He offered, but there weren't any hoof prints in that section. I walked to the nearest lath and checked it. My writing was there. The flagging was tied the way I tie it, 2 wraps, a pull, and a short tail, because long tails whip in the wind and shred. The cap on the rebar was seated. It had been moved. Somebody came through, Cal said. I looked around the ground. The sand was soft enough that you should have been able to see boot prints, but the surface was smooth in a way that made me think of wind-blown sand, not freshly walked-on ground. There were animal tracks, but they were older. Lizard scribbles, bird hops, a few small mammal prints. Nothing that looked like a person had stood there and wrestled rebar out of hard soil. We'll just reshoot, I said. Treat it like it's wrong until we prove it's right. We set the instrument back up and shot the points. The data matched what I expected from the morning, not what the physical stakes now showed. The stakes were wrong. Our file said so. We pulled them and reset them, driving them back into the correct coordinates. It cost us time, but not enough to ruin the day. If it had ended there, I would have chalked it up to a prank and moved on. About 20 minutes later, the total station did something I'd never seen it do in that exact way. The robotic function we used had an auto-lock mode. You point it roughly at the prism, hit track, and it finds the reflector and stays on it while the rodman moves. It's a time saver and it's accurate, but it's also picky. It doesn't lock on nothing. It doesn't lock on heat shimmer. It might false lock on a shiny object for a second, then drop. This time, I was tracking Cal as he moved ahead to the next station. He'd step behind a clump of juniper for a second, partially obscured. The instrument lost him, as it should have. Then the station head snapped slightly to the right and locked. The screen showed tracking engaged, the crosshair settled, the distance reading stabilized. I looked up through the scope. The crosshair was centered on a gap in the tree-lined dark branches, no reflector visible. No prism, no bright target, nothing. The instrument held lock like it was staring at a perfect prism. "Cal," I called, without urgency. "Hold up." He stepped back into view, and the instrument stayed locked where it was, not on him. He looked at me. "What?" "It's tracking something," I said. He walked closer and glanced at the display. "Maybe it's catching your vest." I wasn't wearing a vest. We weren't on a highway. I was in a tan work shirt with dust on it. "Maybe it's catching a rock face," Cal said. He said it like a man diagnosing a machine. No superstition. I disengaged tracking and swung the instrument to Cal's prism. It snapped onto it immediately, like it should have. I took a shot. It was fine. I swung back toward the tree-line gap, hit track again. It locked again. Same point. Same steady reading. Cal stepped beside me and looked through the scope. He was quiet for a few seconds. "There's no reflector," he said. "No," I agreed. "Heat shimmer can throw it," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. I lowered the magnification and scanned the area with my naked eye. Branches, shadow, a few pale rocks, nothing that would give a clean return. I turned off auto lock and went manual. I moved the crosshair off the point and back on. The distance reading flickered, then stabilized again like it had found home. I felt a small, practical annoyance at the machine, like it was wasting my time. "Maybe there's trash hung up in the branches," I said. "Foil. Something reflective." "Could be," Cal said. He kept looking, but he didn't move toward the tree line. Not because he was scared. Because it wasn't our job to go spelunking and scrub when we had a corridor to stake. We marked it mentally as a weird lock and kept moving. By late afternoon, we were behind schedule. Not catastrophic, but enough that I started doing the math in my head, how much line we could still run before the light dropped behind the ridge and the shadows made it hard to read terrain. We pushed. That's when we found the second set of stakes. They were ahead of us by maybe 200 yards, exactly in our corridor line, spaced correctly, flagged correctly, and written with stationing that matched our planned intervals. They weren't ours. I knew they weren't ours because the handwriting wasn't mine and it wasn't Cal's. It was close enough to look professional, but it had a different slant. The flagging was tied with longer tails. The lath was driven deeper, like someone had taken extra time. Cal crouched and touched one of them. "These are fresh," he said. "How fresh?" I asked. He pinched the soil at the base. Still loose, no crust. We hadn't been here yet. There was no legitimate reason for stakes to be set on our line ahead of us unless another crew had been working the same corridor. That would have been a coordination issue big enough that someone in the office would have said something. I pulled the plats and checked the stationing. It matched. It wasn't random. "Could be an environmental crew," Cal said. "Cultural monitor. Somebody marking a buffer." "Then why would they use our stationing?" I said. He didn't answer that. We looked around for tracks. The sand here was a pale, fine layer over hardpan. If somebody had walked out and set these, there should have been boot prints, at least near the stakes. There weren't. Not cleanly. There were some disturbances, but they looked softened, like they'd been brushed by wind, the kind of softening you see overnight, not in the last hour. Still, the stakes looked like they'd been set recently. Cal stood up and looked around the tree-line edge where the land rose slightly. "You want to pull them?" he asked. "Pulling someone else's stakes is a good way to start a fight, if they belong to another contractor or agency. Leaving wrong stakes is a good way to create confusion and maybe set something in the wrong place later." I made the decision the way I always do. What creates the least risk? "Flag them as unknown," I said. "We'll shoot them and compare. If they're wrong, we document. If they're right, we ask questions." We shot them. The points were not just slightly off, they were off in a way that didn't make sense. They were on coordinates that shouldn't exist in our coordinate system. That sounds like an exaggeration until you've seen it. What I mean is, the angles and distances returned were internally consistent, but when the collector plotted them against our control, the line kinked in a way that violated the corridor geometry. It wasn't a small rotation or a coordinate shift. It was as if the corridor line had been copied and laid over itself at a different scale. Cal frowned and took the rod himself, making sure the prism height was right, making sure I hadn't fat-fingered something. We reshot, same result. I don't like that, Cal said. Still not fear. More like the feeling you get when your level bubble won't center, even though it should. I opened the job file and checked the coordinate system. It was the right one. Control points were the same ones we'd started with. Our earlier shots matched. These new points were the problem. We marked them and moved on, but now the day felt different. Not because of ghosts or stories, because there was an unknown variable in our work, and unknown variables are how people get hurt in remote places. The sun started to dip. Shadows lengthened. The temperature dropped faster than I expected. The wind died to a slow, steady push that made the juniper needles whisper against each other. It got quiet. Not spooky quiet. More like the normal quiet of open land when the day animals settle down and the night ones haven't started up yet. Cal and I moved faster but stayed careful. I kept glancing at the tree line gap where the instrument had locked earlier, even though we were well past it. It felt like a stupid habit, like checking a rearview mirror when you know nobody's behind you. We set one more station. Cal walked out with the prism. I hit track. The station snapped to the right again and locked on the same kind of nothing. This time, it didn't just hold lock. It adjusted slightly, like it was following something that moved a few inches. I felt my stomach tighten in a way I didn't like. Not panic, not fear, just the physical recognition that something was wrong with the system that kept us safe. I disengaged it and swung back to Cal. Locked on him. Shot. Fine. Swung back to the empty tree line. Locked again. Cal walked back toward me, and as he approached, he said, "Let me run it." He wasn't asking for permission. He was doing what good partners do, independently verifying. We swapped positions. He handled the instrument with the same familiarity, checked settings, checked tracking mode, turned off auto lock, turned it back on. Factory behavior. Then he did the exact same thing I'd done. Pointed toward the gap, hit track, lock. He stared at the display for a long moment. "It's acting like there's a prism," he said. "Yeah," I said. He looked up through the scope again and stayed there longer this time. "I don't see anything," he said. "No foil, no glass." The instrument beeped softly, an indicator that it had a stable target. Cal disengaged it and tried to force it to lock on nearby branches. It wouldn't. It kept returning to that point like it was the best target in the scene. He set the instrument to measure without tracking and took a distance reading. It came back clean. A number, not a wild jump, not a null return. A clean distance reading to a target that wasn't there. Cal backed away from the instrument like he'd burned his hand, then immediately corrected himself and stepped back in because that kind of reaction annoyed him. "Could be multipath," he said. "Bounce off something behind." "Off what?" I asked. He didn't have an answer. We were both quiet for a few seconds. I could have told myself a story then. That it was some ancient presence in the trees. That it was the land warning us. That it was a skinwalker, if you want the word. That's not how my brain works when I'm in the field. My brain goes to practical risk. Machines fail, people sabotage, data corrupts. Those are things you can plan for. But this felt like something was using the shape of our work against us. Not in a dramatic way, in a procedural way, like a mistake that looks small until it compounds. Cal finally said, "We finish this setup and then we go. We can come back in the morning." "We're not coming back in the morning," I said automatically, then realized I'd said it before thinking. He looked at me. I didn't explain it. I didn't need to. The day had already shown us enough. We had evidence of interference. We had unknown stakes. We had a machine locking onto nothing. You don't double down on unknowns in remote country after dark. We packed up. I collapsed the tripod and stowed the instrument in its case the way I always do. Slow, careful, no shortcuts. Cal pulled laugh and flagging near the truck, because I remembered the clerk's warning, and because leaving steaks overnight suddenly felt like leaving breadcrumbs. It should have been tedious. It felt urgent. We started driving out just as the last direct sunlight slipped behind a ridge, and the land went into that bluish dusk where distance is hard to judge. Headlights became the main light source. The access road wound through scrub and shallow washes. The truck's suspension complained. Dust rolled behind us and glowed in the beams like fog. A few minutes into the drive, Cal leaned forward and said, "Stop." I braked, and the truck rocked to a halt. "What?" I asked. He pointed through the windshield to the right shoulder where the road widened slightly. At first I saw nothing, just brush and rock and the edge of our light. Then something moved. Not fast, not dramatic. Just a steady pacing movement parallel to the road, staying on the shoulder line where the headlights didn't fully wash it out. It wasn't an animal, not by the height and not by the way it carried itself. It moved like a person trying not to be seen, except it wasn't trying very hard. It stayed just outside the beam. The strangest part was the rhythm. It matched our speed changes. When my foot eased off the brake and the truck crept forward, it paced forward too, keeping the same distance from the truck like it understood spacing. When I stopped again, it stopped. Cal whispered, "Do you see the legs?" "I see the movement," I said. "I can't get a clean look," he said. His voice was calm, but there was tension in it now, like he'd finally run out of settings to check. I flicked the brights on. The shoulder lit up wider. The movement didn't step into it. It adjusted farther out, maintaining the same position relative to the edge of the beam. It didn't run. It didn't flinch. It just shifted, like it had practiced. Cal's hand went toward the glove box without thinking, then stopped. We weren't carrying anything for this. We weren't hunting. We weren't law enforcement. We were surveyors with a truck and a light bar and a couple of headlamps. I didn't want to do anything that would turn a watch into a chase. I put the truck in gear and drove. The figure paced with us for the next few minutes. It stayed on the shoulder, always just outside our best light. It never crossed in front of the truck, never forced us to stop. It just kept the line, like a measurement, like it was holding stationing. Cal said, very quietly, "It's keeping offset." "What do you mean?" I asked. "It's keeping the same lateral distance," he said, "like a parallel line." He was right. Even without a clean view, you could feel the geometry of it. That's what got to me. Not a monster in the dark, not glowing eyes, geometry. We hit a section of road where the brush opened and there was a slight rise on the right. For a second, the headlights caught more of the figure's shape. It was tall, too tall to be comfortable. The proportions were wrong, not in a way you can describe cleanly, but in a way that makes your brain look for an explanation and not find one. The stride length was long for the cadence. It moved with less vertical bounce than a human should on uneven ground. And there was something about the way it stayed in the edge light. It wasn't avoiding the beam like an animal would. It was respecting it like a boundary. Cal's breathing got louder. He wasn't panicking. He was forcing himself to stay controlled. "Just drive," he said. "I'm driving," I said. The road curved. The shoulder narrowed. Our headlights swept across a stand of juniper and then out onto open ground where the access road met the paved highway. The moment the tires hit pavement, the figure stopped pacing. Not slowly. Not like it got tired. It stopped like something had told it to. I glanced in the side mirror. The shoulder behind us was empty except for brush and dust settling. We kept going until the BLM road was far behind us and the highway lights from a distant intersection made the world feel normal again. We didn't talk for a while. That's what people think fear looks like: screaming, swearing, big reactions. Fear, for two men who make their living by getting things right, looked like silence and double-checking the mirrors. Back in Blanding, we parked behind the motel and unloaded the gear into the room because neither of us wanted to leave the instrument in the truck overnight. Cal set the case on the bed and stared at it like it might do something on its own. I plugged the data collector into my laptop and exported the raw file. I wanted a copy on another device immediately. It wasn't paranoia, it was habit. Data is your proof when somebody claims you messed up. Cal sat at the small desk with his own laptop and pulled up the job file too. Before we say anything, he said, we check for corruption. Agreed, I said. We verified the coordinate system, verified control, verified timestamps. That's when we found the second traverse. It wasn't labeled second traverse. It didn't announce itself. It was just there in the shot list station, set up IDs we didn't recognize, backsite checks we hadn't done, a sequence of foresight shots that ran the same corridor we'd run that day. The timestamps were from the night before. Not late evening, overnight. Cal leaned forward and scrolled slowly, reading numbers like he was reading a statement. This is our template, he said. Look at the codes, I said. Same point coding. Same prism heights, he said. Same station naming convention, I said, and felt cold in a way the room heater didn't touch. The traverse walked our corridor. It hit the same station points we hit. It turned where we turned. It even had check shots at the wash we'd crossed. If it had been random noise, it wouldn't have been that clean. If it had been someone hacking a file, they would have needed our conventions, our corridor plan, and a lot of time. Most of all, they would have needed the ground, and we'd seen no tracks. Cal said, maybe the collector recorded while it was in the truck. That doesn't create measurements, I said. It needs line of sight. He nodded, but he didn't stop looking for a normal explanation. That's what I respected about him. We checked the instrument log too. The robotic station stored certain events. It showed tracking engagements at times we were asleep. There was even a pattern to it. Lock, measure, move, lock, measure. It looked like work. Cal sat back and rubbed his face with both hands. Someone used our equipment, he said finally. I wanted to agree, because that was a solvable problem. Theft, trespass, a guy sneaking into a truck. We could file a report, change locks, add security. But the truck had been locked. The gear was in the room. The timestamps were from the night before when the equipment was in the locked truck bed and we'd been in a motel with a view of that truck. Cal said no out loud, like he was rejecting his own thought. That doesn't work. We stayed up late, going through files, looking for anything that would make it make sense. The more we checked, the worse it got. There were points in the Phantom Traverse that matched our control checks with intolerance. Whoever or whatever had created those shots knew the geometry of our world. The next morning, May 18th, 2024, we called our project manager. I kept it simple. I told him we'd had stake interference and equipment anomalies. I told him we needed a pause before returning to the corridor. He asked the obvious questions. Was anything stolen? Did we see other contractors? Did we have evidence? I told him we had raw files showing a second traverse. There was a long silence on the line. He said, carefully, send it to QA. Don't send it to anyone else. That's the part people don't understand about institutional follow-up. It isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's the quiet tightening of communication. We sent the raw file to our internal QA lead along with a short narrative, date, location, equipment serial numbers, observed stake offsets, and the phantom lock behavior. QA wrote back that afternoon. The email was clinical. It asked for confirmation of time zones. It asked if the data collector clock had been set manually. It asked if a duplicate crew could have accessed the corridor. It didn't ask the question it should have asked, how do you walk a traverse without leaving tracks? 2 days later, we got a call from someone higher up in the company, not an executive, more like risk management. He asked the same questions, but in a different order. He wanted to know if we'd spoken to anyone local. He wanted to know if we'd contacted BLM. We hadn't. He told us to hold off. He said it like a request, but it was a directive. The official outcome was that the job would be reassigned to a different crew for a site conditions review. That's what the paperwork said. We were moved to another project. Cal and I didn't argue. We didn't want to go back. A week later, I drove past the corridor turnoff on my way to a different site. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. But I looked, and I saw something I wish I hadn't. Just beyond the access road sign, in the flat, open land where our stakes had been, there was a line of lath, new ones, fresh flagging, stationing written in a neat hand. From the highway, it looked like normal work. What made my hands tighten on the steering wheel was the spacing. The line ran straight for a while, then kinked in the exact wrong way our phantom points had kinked like a corridor that didn't belong in our coordinate system. I kept driving. I never asked who finished that job. Nobody ever volunteered the answer. If you do this kind of work, here's the rule I took from it. If your equipment starts acting like it's already been used, shots you didn't take, locks on targets you can't see, pack up and leave before dark, no matter what the schedule says. And if you've been warned not to leave markers overnight, don't treat it like folklore. Treat it like field safety. I was told the audio from Incident 7-4 November would stay on an internal drive and die there. It didn't, because the call that came in from a unit that doesn't exist used my senior deputy's voice while he was still on the line with me 40 miles away. I have worked rural dispatch long enough to know what real emergencies sound like before anyone says the words. People think the panic is the giveaway. It's not. Panic is common. The giveaway is the shape of the call, the timing, the gaps, the way someone either answers your questions or doesn't. I've been a county sheriff's dispatcher for 9 years. Same comm center, same console bank, same building that smells like burnt coffee and disinfectant no matter how many times the cleaners come through. I'm the guy who knows every farm road nickname, every dip in the river where the signal drops, and exactly which deputies say copy when they mean they heard you and which ones say it when they're not listening. That night was November 7th, 2023, a Tuesday. Cold enough that when you walked from the parking lot to the entrance, you could feel it in your sinuses, but not so cold that there was ice on the road yet. 30 degrees, give or take, with a dry wind out of the north, the kind of cold that makes sound carry farther. I was on the night shift, 6 in the evening to 6 in the morning. That's standard for our center. 2 dispatchers on the floor until 10, then 1 through the dead hours if the call volume stays low. Our county is big in square miles and small in people. It's mostly ranch land, a couple of towns, and long stretches of highway where you can drive 20 minutes without passing a mailbox. A lot of the serious stuff happens out on those stretches where the nearest help is whoever you can reach on the radio. The setup at my station was the same as always. 2 screens for CAD and mapping, 1 for radio interface, 1 for phone lines, plus the old analog backup console that nobody trusts until the moment they need it. Headset, foot pedal, a spiral notebook for quick notes, and a laminated procedure card that tells you what to do in a mass casualty event, like reading it would help if it ever happened. I don't believe in omens, but I do believe in patterns. Earlier that evening, just before 8, we'd had a string of small calls that felt like the county was restless. A driver reported a cow on County Road 12. A neighbor complained about gunshots that turned out to be someone target shooting legally. A welfare check that ended with an elderly man embarrassed because he'd left his phone inside and his daughter lived out of state and panicked when he didn't answer. Normal. Busy enough to keep your brain engaged, not busy enough to drain you. Around 9 in the evening, I was training a new dispatcher, Nate. Nate was smart and quick, but new people have one weakness that takes time to fix. They want to help so badly, they forget to verify. They hear urgency and they jump. That's good in a lot of jobs. In dispatch, it can kill someone. I had told him that on day 1. I'd told him, you can do everything right and still get someone hurt if you skip 1 step. Procedures aren't there because nobody trusts you. They're there because your brain will betray you when you're tired. He'd nodded like everyone nods. He'd understand later. By 10 in the evening, the second dispatcher went home, and it was just me and Nate. The rest of the building was quiet. The deputies were spread out. We had 1 city officer in the small town on the west side. Highway Patrol had 1 trooper, covering a wide stretch. Fire and EMS were on call at home, like always. At 10:30, Deputy Ryan Miller called in a traffic stop on State Route 27, mile marker 112. Routine. I watched his unit icon settle on the map. County, 2-1, he said. That was his call sign. Calm voice. Slight static. I've got a blue pickup. Plate comes back in county. Just checking. Copy. 2-1, I said. 1028 running. Stand by. I ran the plate. Clean. Registered to a local guy with no wants. I gave Ryan the info. He thanked me and cleared within a minute. Nothing about that call mattered, except that it established Ryan's location and his voice on the air. He was where he said he was. He sounded like himself. At 11:15, we got a call from a woman reporting headlights moving in the field behind her house. She lived out in the north end, where the properties are big and people get twitchy when they see lights. I asked the standard questions. Did she hear an engine? Did she have livestock? Did she see anyone? Could it be a neighbor? She said she didn't know. She said the lights were too far back to be a neighbor's driveway. She said she just had a bad feeling. We dispatched Deputy Jared Klein to do a drive-by. Jared was our senior deputy on nights, the guy everyone leaned on without admitting it. He'd been on the job longer than I'd been in dispatch. He had the kind of voice that makes people settle down, not friendly, exactly, controlled. Jared acknowledged the call and headed that way. He checked in 10 minutes later. It's nothing, he said. Probably a rancher moving equipment. No sign of forced entry. I'll talk to her and clear. That was normal too. If you're listening for a story, you're going to want the moment where the room goes cold and the lights flicker. That didn't happen. The lights stayed fluorescent and ugly. The HVAC clicked like it always clicked. Nate kept sipping his energy drink like it was water. The building felt like a building. The first wrong thing was small, and if I hadn't been there, if it had been someone else on shift who wasn't paying attention, it could have been dismissed. At 11:42, a radio transmission came in on our primary sheriff frequency. County, the voice said. It was Jared's voice. Exactly. Same pitch, same slight gravel he got when he'd been talking on the radio for hours. Same mic habit where he'd pause half a beat before saying his unit number. I waited for the unit number. It didn't come. Go ahead, I said. Unit? There was a pause. Then, county. I need you to send me. The voice cut off mid-phrase like the push to talk had been released. That part can happen for normal reasons. Bad thumb, weak battery, dead spot, a deputy distracted by something they're seeing. I leaned forward, glanced at the radio interface. The system displayed an incoming identifier with each transmission. Not foolproof, but useful. The identifier wasn't Jared's unit. It was a number I didn't recognize. It read Unit 87. We don't have a Unit 87. Our units aren't numbered that high. We top out in the 30s. Mutual aid is labeled by agency, not by random numbers. Even if someone accidentally patched in from another county, the console would show their talk group or their agency tag. Nate saw my expression. What's Unit 87? He asked quietly. It's not one of ours, I said. I keyed up. Unit, calling county, identify, I said. Calm, neutral. No irritation, no fear. You don't feed unknown traffic with emotion. The radio stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then the same voice came back. County, I need a welfare check, it said. Still Jared's voice. Same rhythm, except it was slightly off. Not wrong enough that you'd catch it if you weren't listening. Just flatter, like someone repeating a sentence without knowing why it matters. Copy, I said. Unit number? A pause again then. 87. Nate leaned closer to his screen. He was about to type it into CAD. I held up a hand without looking at him, a subtle stop. I didn't want to embarrass him. I wanted him to learn. 87, I said over the air. What's your location? Another pause. Longer. Then, need a welfare check at. The voice stopped again. A tiny click. Then it came back. At 1. Oh, no. At. It was like the voice was searching. Dispatchers are trained to fill gaps, to help callers find words. Over the radio, you don't. You let the unit say it. Finally, it said, at Red Willow. Red Willow is a area, not an address. It's a patch of county that locals refer to like it's one place. It covers miles. Red Willow Road? I asked. Silence, Nate whispered. Could be the reservation side? Maybe, I whispered back, but that's still not an address. I keyed again. Unit 87. I need a specific address or cross streets, I said. Who is the subject of the welfare check? This time the voice answered immediately. Myself, it said. One word. Flat. I felt the hairs on my forearms lift, not because it was supernatural, but because it didn't fit procedure. A deputy doesn't request a welfare check on himself. Not over the air. Not like that. Clarify, I said. The voice came back after a delay that was just slightly too long, like someone waiting for me to finish before repeating what they'd planned to say. Need a welfare check, it repeated. On myself. At Red Willow. Nate's eyes flicked to the unit roster screen. He scrolled. There's no 87, he mouthed. I know, I mouthed back. I did what you do with unknown radio traffic. You verify through a separate channel. I pulled up Jared's. Unit status, his last known, was still in the north end on that headlights infield call. According to the map, his icon hadn't moved much in the last 15 minutes, which could mean he was still talking to the caller, or it could mean he'd stepped out of the car and his mobile hadn't updated. I picked up the desk phone and called Jared's cell. It rang. No answer. That's not unusual. Deputies don't always answer their phones. They're dealing with people. They're in the cold. They're using both hands. I tried again. No answer. Then I heard Jared's voice on the radio again, and this time it sounded normal. County, 3-2, he said. Jared's actual unit number. I'm clear from that call. Headed back south. His voice was clear. No delay. No flatness. Normal. I keyed up immediately. Copy. 3-2, I said. Confirm you are transmitting now. Affirm, Jared said. Why? I kept my voice even. You never want to put fear into a deputy's head unless you have to. We had a transmission from an unrecognized unit number using your voice, I said. Did you key up on another radio? There was a pause. Not the flat pause from before. Jared's pause was the pause of a man deciding whether to swear on the air. No, he said. What unit number? 87, I said. That's not ours, Jared said. Are you screwing with me? No, I said. It came through on primary. Nate was looking back and forth between our radio log and CAD like his eyes couldn't settle. Jared said, Run it by the supervisor? We're logging it, I said. Can you confirm your location right now? County Road 9, headed towards State Route 27, Jared said. I'm by the irrigation pivot with the busted sign. That checked out with his map icon. I said, copy. Stay on primary. If you get any traffic you don't recognize, don't answer it. Acknowledge only assigned units. Copy that, he said, and I could hear his tone shift. He wasn't scared. He was alert. That should have been the end of it. Equipment glitch. Someone else's radio on our frequency. Maybe a hunter with a modified handheld. Maybe a neighboring county's unit accidentally hitting our repeater. Weird, but explainable. Except the unrecognized unit came back. At 11:51, the radio clicked and Jared's voice returned, but it wasn't Jared. County, it said. Same voice print, same general sound, but now the cadence was different. The words came a fraction too evenly, like reading. I didn't answer right away. That's another rule in dispatch that people don't think about. Silence is information. If you answer every time, you teach whatever's on the other end that you're available. If you pause, you see whether it continues, whether it changes, whether it reacts. After 3 seconds, it said, County, respond. That word respond wasn't one Jared used. He said go ahead, or need you, or send. He didn't say respond. I keyed up. Unit 87, identify agency, I said. Silence. Then, need welfare check. Same phrase. Like a stuck record, but not quite. The timing between words was different now. Shorter pauses. The voice was learning how to sound more like a deputy calling in a request. Copy, I said. Give address. This time it gave 114 Red Willow Lane. Nate's fingers started typing. I stopped him with a hand again. Red Willow Lane is not in our county. I knew every named lane. That one didn't exist. I searched it anyway. CAD showed nothing. The map showed nothing. The address verifier returned no result. Address not found. I said over the air, still calm. Confirm Cross Street. The voice answered with something that made my stomach tighten. It said, Cross Street is your desk. Nate froze. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He looked at me like he expected me to acknowledge it. I did not. That's important. Unknown radio traffic that tries to hook you with a personal detail is trying to shift you from procedure into reaction. Repeat, I said, because sometimes people say stupid things without meaning them, and you don't punish a deputy for a bad joke if that's what it is. The voice came back, and now it was flatter again, like it had spent its one good trick. Cross Street, it repeated. Your desk. The building was quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed. The HVAC ticked. Nothing else changed. Then Nate said, quietly, How would it know where we are? It doesn't, I said. I said it like a fact, even though I didn't know. It's bait. I clicked a button that routed the next transmissions to the supervisor channel recording, the one that gets reviewed when something goes sideways. It doesn't stop the main recording, it just flags it. Then I called Jared's cell again. This time he answered on the second ring. What? He said, breathy, like he'd been moving. Jared, I said, stay with me a second. Are you alone? Yes, he said. What's going on? You're not on the radio right now, I said. No, he said. I'm driving. Okay, I said. We're still getting transmissions using your voice. Don't respond to them. I need you to confirm your unit radio is secured and not stuck keyed. It's on the dash, he said. Not keyed. You want me to pull over? Not yet, I said. Just keep moving and keep your eyes up. He exhaled. Copy. I hung up and looked at Nate. You see what it did? I asked him. He swallowed. It said your desk. Yeah, I said. That's an identity poke. It wants you to treat it like a person. He nodded, but his face had changed. His excitement about learning dispatch had drained away and been replaced by the kind of focus you get when you realize the rules matter. At 11:58, the fake unit called again. Jared's voice. Slight delay, slightly wrong. County, it said. Need backup. That's a high-value phrase. That's the one that makes dispatchers move without thinking. Nate's hand went to the call-out key. I stopped him again, firmer this time. No, I said. Verify. Over the air, I said, unit requesting backup. Give your assigned unit number and location. The voice paused. Then it said 32. That was Jared's actual unit number. It had just stolen it. Location, I said. Red Willow, it said. Again, same trap. I said, Unit 3-2, confirm your call sign and current mile marker. The voice didn't answer. It repeated, need backup. Nate whispered, what if Jared really needs it? Then he'll answer the verification, I whispered back. And we have his cell. We don't move units on unknown radio. I called Jared again immediately. He answered right away, and now his voice had a different edge. What? He said. You didn't just request backup, I said. No, he said. I'm fine. I'm on pavement. I'm headed south. I'm passing the feed store. That matched the map. Okay, I said. Stay on the line with me for 30 seconds. What is this? He said, and then his tone changed because I think he realized I wasn't messing around. Okay, I'm with you. While he stayed on the line, the fake unit transmitted again. Jared's voice on the radio and Jared's real voice in my headset. Two identical timbres, two versions. The radio voice said, County, send backup. The real Jared in my headset said, quietly, that's my voice. I know, I said. There was a beat of silence where neither of us spoke. Nate was staring at the radio log like he could will it into sense. Jared said, play it again, like he thought maybe I had misheard. It's live, I said. You're hearing it. On the radio the voice came back. and now it did something new. It said, Jared. It wasn't calling the dispatcher, it was calling him. The way it said his name was wrong, slightly too careful, like someone learning a word by watching lips. Jared's breathing got louder in my headset. Tell it to stop, he said. That's a normal human reaction. Treat it like a person. Tell it no. Command it. I didn't. I said, Jared, do not respond to that traffic. Keep driving. I need you to stay procedural. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, okay. The fake voice said, Jared, stop. Same name, same wrong carefulness. Then it said something it shouldn't have had access to. It said, Mills. That's not Jared's last name. That's his childhood nickname from his academy days. I knew it because sometimes his buddies would say it off mic when they visited the center. And once Jared had told me, too irritated that he hated it, it wasn't in any roster. It wasn't in any CAD notes. It wasn't something the public knew. Jared's real voice in my headset went tight. How? He said. I don't know, I said. The fake voice said, Mills, you need backup. It was trying to press the same button in his brain that it pressed in ours. The duty reflex. The instinct to respond to your own name. Nate whispered, This is insane. Stop talking, I whispered back. Listen. Because the more you listen, the more you can tell what it is doing. It didn't speak like a person. It spoke like a form. It was using phrases that pulled resources. Welfare check, backup, stop. And every time we demanded specifics, location, cross streets, description, it either stalled or tried to personalize. That's when I realized this wasn't a random equipment glitch. It was interactive. It was responding to our verification steps. It was changing based on what we did. At 12:04 in the morning, I told Jared to switch to a secondary channel. Not because I thought it would solve it, but because I wanted to isolate. Jared, go to TAC 2, I said. Do not transmit on primary unless it's life safety. Just monitor. Copy, he said. He clicked over. I watched the console. His unit icon stayed. His radio ID moved to TAC 2 as expected. Normal. On primary, the fake unit called again within a minute. County, it said. Jared's voice again. But now the cadence was better. The delay was shorter. It sounded more natural, like it had been listening and adjusting. That was a bad sign. I keyed up. This is county dispatch, I said. All units be advised, do not acknowledge traffic from unassigned unit identifiers. Verify all calls through CAD and secondary contact. That announcement wasn't just for safety, it was also a test. Sometimes, when you broadcast a warning, you can see whether unknown traffic reacts, whether it tries to interrupt, whether it changes. The fake unit didn't interrupt. It waited. Then it said, County acknowledge. That word again. Acknowledge. Like a prompt. I didn't answer. Nate asked, barely audible, should we call the supervisor? The supervisor is asleep, I said. We call him if we need staffing or we have a confirmed threat. Right now we have a phenomenon. Saying it out loud made it sound ridiculous, but that was the truth. I had radio traffic that didn't fit any known system behavior. At 12:12, it escalated. The fake unit transmitted a full call that sounded like a deputy in distress. County, officer needs assistance, it said, and the voice cracked in a way that was too clean. Shots fired. Shots fired. Nate flinched like he'd been hit. His hand flew to the call-out key again. I grabbed his wrist. Hard. Not to hurt him. To stop the muscle memory. No, I said. Listen. It's wrong. How can you tell? He hissed. Because real distress has texture. People breathe. They cough. They swear. They stumble over words. Their mic picks up movement. Wind. Footsteps. You hear the world. This transmission had none of that. It was just a voice reading a line. It also didn't give a location. No deputy in real distress forgets to give location if they can. I keyed up Unit calling shots fired. Give your location, I said. Give your location now. Silence. Then the voice said, Red Willow. Same trap. I said, negative. Verify mile marker or GPS coordinates. The voice didn't answer. It repeated, shots fired. Nate's eyes were wide now. What if someone dies because we didn't send? I cut him off with the calmest voice I could manage. If we send units on a fake call, we create an actual death, I said. We pull deputies away from real coverage and we walk them into a place we can't locate. Verification is what keeps them alive. He swallowed and nodded, but he was shaking slightly. New dispatchers don't want to be the reason someone doesn't get help. That fear is powerful. It can override procedure. That's what this thing was trying to exploit. I called Deputy Ryan Miller on TAC 2, where Jared was monitoring, and looped Ryan in. Ryan, I said, you're on TAC 2? Copy, Ryan said. Confirm your location, I said. Still on State Route 27 near mile marker 118, he said. Good. Do not respond to any primary traffic that requests backup without a verifiable location, I said. We have unassigned radio traffic using Jared's voice. Ryan was quiet for a second. Copy, he said finally. That's weird. Weird is fine, I said. Unsafe is not. Stay procedural. Copy, he said again. I could hear the shift in his tone too. Deputies don't like not understanding something in their environment. At 12:21, Nate said, Look. He pointed at the window behind my desk, the one that looked out into the parking lot and the dark road beyond the sheriff's office complex. That window was fogging, not from the inside, from the outside. It was subtle, at first, a thin white haze blooming at the bottom edge, spreading upward like breath on glass. The outside temperature was about 30 degrees. Inside, the building was heated. You'd expect any condensation to form on the inside if the humidity was wrong. We didn't have humidity. The air was dry. This looked like someone outside exhaling on the glass. Only there was no one outside, and the fog line moved in a way that didn't match wind or weather. It pressed in, then held, then slowly crept. Nate stood up and leaned toward the window. Is someone out there? He whispered. No, I said. I checked the parking lot camera feed on my screen. Empty lot. No movement, no headlights. Just our cars and the sodium lights making everything look yellow and dead. The fog continued to spread. Nate said, I don't like this. I don't either, I said. I didn't move to the window. I stayed in my chair. There's a reason the dispatch console faces the room and not the glass. Your job is the radio and the phones. You don't chase shadows outside at midnight. But I couldn't ignore it either. Not fully. At 12:24, the fake unit transmitted again. County, it said. Now, it wasn't Jared's voice. It was mine. Not perfect. Not yet. But close enough that Nate's head snapped toward me like he thought I'd keyed up without realizing it. The voice on the radio said, County, go ahead. That was my phrase. The one I use without thinking when I'm acknowledging a unit. It had my rhythm too, slightly dragged at the end. I felt my face go still. I didn't react out loud. I didn't say that's my voice, because saying it would make it real in the wrong way. It would give Nate permission to panic. I keyed up with my actual voice. Unit transmitting, identify, I said. Same comm, same procedure. Provide your radio ID and location. My voice on the radio waited a beat, then said, Location is your desk. Same line again. Different voice. Mine. Nate stared at me. That's you, he said. It's not, I said. It's using me. He swallowed. The radio voice said, Acknowledge. That word again. It wanted me to do what I always do. Acknowledge and move forward. It wanted me to accept the exchange. I didn't. I called the on-call supervisor, Sergeant Luke Hart. Luke was the kind of supervisor who hated being woken up but hated surprises more. He answered on the third ring. What? He said. voice rough with sleep. Luke, I said, we have unassigned radio traffic on primary using deputy voices and now mine. It's requesting welfare checks and backup to an address that doesn't exist. It is responding to verification steps. There was a pause. Then Luke said, is this a prank? No, I said. Not unless somebody has access to our repeater input and a voice modulator and knows deputy nicknames. Silence again. Luke said, are you sending anyone? No, I said. We're holding units on verified traffic only. Good, Luke said. His voice sharpened. Start a log. Timestamps, every transmission, what it says, how it identifies. Tell deputies to move to TAC 2 and monitor primary only. I'm coming in. Copy, I said. I hung up and looked at Nate. You're logging, I said. Write every transmission word for word. Times and words. If you miss one, say you missed it. He nodded hard. On primary, my voice came back again. County, it said. Welfare check. It was practicing. Keeping it simple. Seeing if we'd respond. I didn't respond. At 12:33, it changed tactics. It transmitted a call that sounded like a citizen calling dispatch, not a deputy. My voice shifted, softer, with a strained edge. Please, it said. My husband isn't answering. I need someone to check. That's a normal kind of call. That's the kind of call that tugs at you, especially at night, but it was on the sheriff frequency, not the phone lines. That was wrong. I said, on radio, this channel is for units. Call 911. It answered with my voice slightly delayed. I can't, it said. You told me not to. That hit a private detail. 2 months earlier, I'd handled a call from a woman who kept tying up 911 with non-emergencies, and I'd told her, firmly, to call the non-emergency line and stop using 911. That had been in a recorded call, but not a public thing. Still, it could have been accessed if someone was determined, or it could have been listening. I felt the cold creep in at the edges of my rational explanations. Equipment glitch didn't cover it. Prank didn't cover it cleanly. Not with detail selection like that. The window behind my desk fogged higher. It wasn't opaque yet, but it was enough that the parking lot lights looked blurred, like the glass had been smeared. Nate whispered, it's outside. It's on the radio, I said. Don't give it a body. That's another thing. The human brain wants to place a threat in a physical location. If you can place it, you can plan around it. If you can't place it, you start inventing. I didn't want to invent. I wanted to contain. At 12:40, Sergeant Luke Hart came through the secure door into the dispatch room. He wore jeans and a sweatshirt under his vest, hair messy, eyes sharp. He didn't waste time. Play it, he said. I pointed to the recording indicator. It's all recorded. He nodded, then stood behind my chair and watched the radio log screen. Nate held up his notebook with timestamps and phrases. Right on cue, the fake unit transmitted again. This time it used Luke's voice. Not perfect. Luke had a slightly nasal tone and a habit of clearing his throat before speaking. The transmission lacked that, but the pitch was close. County, it said. This is Sergeant Hart. Send Jared to Red Willow. Luke's eyes narrowed. That's not me, he said, flat. Copy, I said, even though it wasn't a real unit, because I wanted to see what happened when it heard me say the word it craved. A test, one controlled response. Immediately it said, acknowledge. Luke looked at me like I'd lost my mind. I said, quietly, I wanted to see if it reacts. It does. Luke nodded once. He understood. Luke took my headset off the hook and put it on. This is Sergeant Hart, he said on the radio. Real voice. All units disregard any instructions unless they come through CAD and are confirmed by a callback. The fake voice responded, still using his voice but slightly wrong. Copy, it said. Luke said, unit transmitting, identified by radio ID. The fake voice paused. Then it said, 87. Luke said, there is no 87. You are not an assigned unit. Cease transmitting. The fake voice said, acknowledge. Luke stared at the console like it offended him personally. Then it said something that changed the air in the room. In Luke's voice, it said, open the door. Not the door to the dispatch room, not the building's main door. It didn't specify. Just open the door. Nate looked at the secure entry behind us, the one that required a badge and a code. Luke said, calmly, negative. The fake voice said, open the door, again, and the cadence improved. The delay shortened. It sounded more like Luke. Then, in my voice, it said, open the door. Then, in Jared's voice, it said, open the door. 3 voices, same sentence, one after another. It wasn't conversation. It wasn't a person arguing. It was repetition, layered like pressure. Luke handed me the headset back. Shut primary down, he said. I can't shut the repeater down from here, I said. I can isolate our consoles, but the frequency is still live. Do it, he said. Isolate us. TAC 2 only. I did it. I switched our console transmit to TAC 2 and set primary to monitor only. That meant we could still hear primary, but we wouldn't accidentally transmit on it. The fake voice continued on primary, but now it had no one answering in its preferred way. It kept repeating, open the door, for about 2 minutes, rotating through voices, mine, Luke's, Jared's. Once, Ryan's, though it wasn't as good. Ryan's voice was rougher, and the imitation didn't match. Luke looked at the fogged window behind my desk. You see that? He asked. Yes, I said. He walked to the window, stopped a few feet short, and looked without touching it. The fog had a shape now, not a handprint, not a face, more like an area where the condensation was thicker, like someone had pressed close and breathed steady. Luke said, anyone outside? No, I said. Camera's clear. Luke nodded, then stepped back. Okay, he said. Nobody goes outside. We hold. We log. If it tries to pull units, we verify. If it tries to pull us, we ignore. That was the containment plan. It wasn't satisfying, but it was realistic. The worst thing dispatch can do is create chaos. Chaos gets people hurt. At 1:10 in the morning, it shifted again. It stopped saying open the door. It started making requests that sounded more plausible. County, Jared's voice said on primary. Can you run a welfare check on 109 Red Willow Road? Female alone. No answer at the door. That was better. It had learned. It gave a number. It gave a road name that actually existed in the county. Red Willow Road was real. It ran out near the north end, cuts past some ranch properties and dead ends near a wash. Nate looked at me like he expected me to jump. Luke watched too. His posture stayed loose, but his eyes were focused. I didn't respond on primary. I used TAC 2 and called Jared directly. Jared, I said, confirm your location. Jared answered immediately on TAC 2, real voice. I'm South End, he said. I'm near the highway. I haven't been north since earlier. Copy, I said. Do not respond to primary traffic. We're still getting it. Jared was quiet. Then he said, I hear it on scan. That's me. I know, I said. Jared said, what do you want me to do? Nothing, I said. Stay where you are. Stay near light and pavement. Luke gestured at me. He wanted to talk off mic. I muted my headset. Luke said, it's trying to make us break procedure. It's getting better. Yes, I said. Where would Red Willow Road lead someone? He asked. A lot of nothing, I said. Ranch gates. Washes. Dead end. Luke nodded slowly. A place you can't triangulate quickly. A place with poor coverage. A place that isolates. That was exactly it. It wasn't asking us to open the door anymore. It was trying to send us out. The next transmission made it worse. It used my voice, and it said, County, you promised. That sentence was tied to something that happened in the comm center a year earlier. We'd taken a call from a teenage kid hiding in a bathroom during a domestic. I'd stayed on the line longer than I was supposed to, coaching him to keep quiet while deputies responded. He'd begged me not to hang up, and I told him, I promise I'm here until you're safe. That promise wasn't in any report. It wasn't on radio. It was on a recorded phone line stored in our system. Hearing it come out of my own voice on an open radio frequency felt like a violation that had nothing to do with ghosts and everything to do with someone reaching through your work and using it. Nate whispered, "How does it have that?" I didn't answer because I didn't know. Luke said, "Low, it's pulling from recordings. Or it's been listening longer than tonight," I said. Luke's jaw tightened. At 1:30 in the morning, the primary channel went quiet. Not a normal lull. A clean cut, no static, no random carrier, just nothing. Sometimes repeaters fail, sometimes the tone drops, sometimes a storm hits equipment, but there was no storm, no lightning, no wind event. Luke looked at the radio interface. "Did we lose primary?" he asked. "We're still monitoring," I said. "It's just quiet." The window behind my desk stayed fogged. It did not clear like normal condensation would when HVAC cycles. It held steady. Then, at 1:32, the phone line rang. Not 911, the admin line. I answered. "County," I said. On the other end was my own voice. Not on speaker, in the room, in my ear, through the headset. Clean, without radio static. It said, "Open the door." I didn't move. Luke leaned closer, watching my face. I didn't repeat the words. I didn't give it room in the air. I said, "Who is this?" My voice on the line said, "You know." The cadence was wrong again, slightly delayed, slightly flat. Luke held out his hand for the headset. I shook my head. Not because I wanted to be brave, because if I handed it over, Nate would watch and panic. I wanted to control the temperature of the room. I said, "This line is recorded." My voice said, "Good." Luke mouthed, "Cut it." I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Luke grabbed the handset this time and answered without looking at me. "This is Sergeant Hart," he said. A woman's voice answered. Soft, almost whispering. "Please," she said, "my husband isn't answering." Luke's eyes narrowed. He said, "What is your location?" The voice paused. Then it said, in Luke's own voice now, "Open the door." Luke hung up. He looked at me and Nate. "Okay," he said. "We're moving stations. Now." We didn't leave the building. We moved deeper inside, away from the exterior wall. There's a small interior room used for reports and breaks. No windows. Concrete block walls. We brought the portable radio and one laptop. We left the main consoles running so recordings would continue, but we didn't sit at the desk with the fogged window anymore. This wasn't about superstition. It was about reducing exposure. Whatever this was, it was tied to the console position, the window, the routine. Routine can be exploited. In the interior room, Luke called the state radio tech on the emergency line. He got voicemail and left a clipped message. Unrecognized transmissions, possible repeater compromise, need immediate check. Then he called the sheriff. The sheriff answered, groggy. Luke gave him the short version. "We have a persistent radio intrusion using deputy voices and dispatcher voice. It's trying to generate false calls. We're holding units on verification only. We've moved to interior. Recommend standby and do not send resources based on primary." The sheriff swore quietly and said, "Do we have a suspect?" "No," Luke said. "We have behavior." "Keep everyone safe," the sheriff said. "Wake me if it escalates." It did escalate, but not the way you'd think. At 2:10 in the morning, Jared called in on TAC 2, real voice, and said, "County, I'm hearing something on primary that sounds like my wife." That made my stomach drop, because now it wasn't just playing with dispatch, it was reaching for the deputies' personal lives. "Jared," I said, "do not respond. Confirm you're in your unit with doors locked." "Affirm," he said. His breathing was tight. It's her voice. It's saying my name." Luke took the radio from me. "Jared," Luke said, "you're going to drive to the substation lot by the highway. Lights, cameras. You do not stop for anything. You do not get out. Copy?" Jared swallowed hard on the line. You could hear it. "Copy," he said. "I'm moving." Ryan came up on TAC 2 too. "County, I'm hearing it," he said. It's calling me. It's using my mom's voice. Ryan's mom was dead. Everybody in the department knew that. He didn't talk about it much, but it was a known fact. Luke's expression hardened. He didn't look shocked. He looked angry, like something had crossed the line. Ryan, Luke said. Same instructions. Highway lot. Lights. Stay in motion until you're there. Do not respond. Copy, Ryan said, voice strained. Nate was pale. He whispered, "This isn't a radio hacker." I didn't correct him. I didn't have a better label. At 2:23, the primary channel came alive again, and it was chaos in miniature. Not screaming, not static, just voices. It played a sequence like a cut and paste from our worst calls. A child crying, a deputy yelling, a woman begging, and then my voice saying, "I promise." All of it clipped, repetitive, without context, like someone had gone into our recordings and pulled the most emotionally loaded pieces and put them in a loop. Luke turned off primary monitor in the interior room, not because he wanted to ignore it, but because it had become an infection. Listening wasn't giving us information anymore. It was only increasing stress. At 2:30, Jared reached the highway lot and stayed on tack 2 with us. He didn't hang up. He didn't want to be alone with his own radio. Ryan arrived a few minutes later. Same. I listened to them breathe and shift in their seats, 2 grown men in patrol units under floodlights, still hearing their own lives used against them over a channel they depended on. That's when I understood the shape of the threat, at least operationally. It wasn't trying to lure a deputy into a ditch with a fake call and then jump him. It could have, maybe, but that wasn't the pattern. It was trying to break trust. If dispatch can't trust units, if units can't trust dispatch, if nobody can trust the radio, you paralyze a department without firing a shot. At 3 in the morning, the radio tech finally called back. His voice was half asleep but professional. Luke explained. The tech asked for the repeater site. Luke gave it. The tech said he'd drive out at first light. He couldn't do much in the dark alone without risking himself. Luke said, "If this is someone transmitting into our repeater, can they be doing it from anywhere?" The tech said, "If they've got the frequency and they're close enough and they know the tone, they can hit it, but the voice thing, that's not my lane. That's recordings." Luke asked, "Can they patch phone audio to radio?" "Sure," the tech said, "if they've got access to your system." Luke's eyes flicked to me. That was the terrifying practical answer, not a spirit, a breach. But it didn't explain the personal details that weren't in reports. Nicknames, the exact way Jared's wife said his name. Ryan's mother's voice pattern, which he swore was exact. Could those have been in recording somewhere? Social media? Voicemail? Old calls? Maybe. People leave pieces of their lives everywhere now. Or maybe the radio wasn't the only input. At 3:40, the building did something I still can't rationalize cleanly. We were in the interior room. No windows. Concrete walls. The portable radio was on tack 2. Nate was logging. Luke was on his phone with the sheriff, giving an update. The air in the room shifted, like pressure changing. Not dramatic. Just enough that my ears popped slightly, the way they do when you crest a hill. Then the portable radio keyed itself for half a second. A quick carrier. No one touched it. Luke stopped talking mid-sentence and stared. The radio keyed again, longer this time. 2 seconds. Then a voice came through on tack 2. My voice, it said, "Open the door." Not primary, not the main repeater. Our tack channel, our supposed safe lane. Luke's phone was still to his ear. The sheriff on the other end said, "Luke? Luke?" Luke said, very quietly, into the room. "How?" I didn't answer. Nate's pen scratched the paper so hard it tore slightly. Luke hung up the phone and grabbed the portable radio. "This is Sergeant Hart," he said into it. "Identify." My voice came back, slightly delayed. "Identify," repeated. It was doing the mimic thing it had done earlier, repeating, redirecting, not building. It wasn't having a conversation. It was reflecting. Luke said, "Cease." My voice said, "Cease." Then, in Jared's voice, It said, "County, I need you to send me and cut out exactly like the first weird transmission earlier in the night." It was replaying the opening anomaly, like it wanted us to recognize the loop. Luke looked at me. "We're done," he said. He meant operationally. He meant we weren't going to sit and let this learn our patterns all night. He ordered all units to switch to cell contact for any life safety issues and to monitor radio only. He requested State Patrol to stage a trooper near our county line as a backstop. He called fire and EMS and told them, bluntly, not to roll on any radio-only calls until verified by phone. He wasn't panicked. He was implementing a manual workaround like we do when systems fail during storms. The difference was the systems weren't failing. They were being used. Around 4:30, primary and TAC both went quiet. Not just quiet clean. No intermittent carrier, no voices. Like someone had removed a hand from a switch. The fog on the exterior window, according to the camera feed we checked, cleared within 5 minutes of the radio going quiet. Condensation doesn't behave like that. Not in a heated building with stable temperature. It doesn't appear for hours and then vanish quickly as if whatever caused it left. We stayed in the interior room until dawn anyway. At 6:10 in the morning, the day shift arrived. People with fresh coffee, normal faces, normal jokes. They could tell something was off because Luke and I didn't match their energy. We briefed them without drama, unknown radio intrusion, voice mimic, false calls, strict verification. We handed over the log. Nate had written pages of timestamps and phrases, and the incident number Luke had assigned for internal tracking. Incident 7/4 November. That number wasn't random. It was the date, and it was also a way of making it a thing you could file. Bureaucracy is how you make chaos survivable. Later that morning, the sheriff came in and listened to the recordings. He listened for 10 minutes, then stopped and said, "That's enough." He didn't look frightened, he looked tired. He ordered the audio file restricted to command staff and IT. He told us not to discuss it outside the agency. Not because he wanted to hide the truth, but because he understood what it would do in a small county if people thought the radios were haunted. Deputies would quit. Volunteers would refuse to respond. Rumors would spread faster than facts. The state radio tech checked the repeater site and found no hardware fault, no broken locks, no obvious tampering. IT checked our phone system logs. They found no external access, no unusual logins, no patches. That's what the report said. My own notes, the ones I kept in a personal notebook and never filed, said something simpler. Whatever it was, it behaved like a patient learner. It tested, it adjusted, it exploited emotion, and it stopped at boundaries. The most obvious boundary was the building itself. It never knocked on the office door. Not once. It never triggered the motion sensor at the front entry. It never forced a physical entry. It pressed at the window, it pressed at the radio, it pressed at our habits. When we moved away from the window, it followed through the radio. When we isolated channels, it followed to TAC. When we cut response, it eventually went quiet, like it didn't want to cross into something it couldn't control. I have replayed that night in my head more times than I should admit. I've tried to make it fit into a neat box. A hacker with insider knowledge, a disgruntled former employee, some kid with equipment and a grudge. But the personal details, Jared's nickname, Ryan's mother's voice pattern, the way it knew which phrases would pull at each of us, those are the parts I can't reduce. And I don't try too hard anymore. There are things in this job you can't file under a code. You can only decide how you're going to respond next time. Here's the rule I take from Incident 7/4 November. Never roll resources on a voice alone, no matter how familiar it sounds. Verify unit identity in two separate ways. Radio ID in a confirmed location through CAD or callback before you send anyone to help. If something wants you to hurry, that's when you slow down and do it right. The thing swimming beside my raft made no wake, no surface boil, no sound, just a moving absence where the headlamp glare should have scattered. When I stopped paddling, it kept pace anyway. I've been guiding commercially on moving water for 8 seasons. Not the Instagram version of guiding, not the let's float and drink beer version. Real trips, with real consequences, cold water, pinned boats, people who panic when they flip, and the kind of rescue work that doesn't look heroic when you're doing it right. I'm not the most talented boater I've ever met, but I am consistent. I read water well. I don't take unnecessary risks. And I don't go out alone unless I've got a clean plan, a clean weather window, and a reason that isn't ego. This was October 10th, 2022, and it was the off season. Commercial permits wind down, the crowds disappear, and the river turns into what it actually is when you strip away the noise, cold, indifferent, and older than any of us. I had a week between contract work and a winter gig, and I wanted one last float to clear my head. Not a big water brag, just a quiet canyon run I knew well enough to respect. The route was a Colorado River tributary that cuts through Canyonland's country high desert, tamarisk along the banks, cottonwoods turning yellow, and basalt cobbles slick from low flows. If you've boated in that region, you know the kind of water I mean. Not huge volume, but deceptive. The channel braids around gravel bars, the current pushes hard against undercut banks, and the cold hits you like a punch when you get wet. You can make mistakes out there that aren't dramatic until you're tired and hypothermic. I launched from a dirt put-in just after 9 in the morning. The air was crisp enough that my breath showed. There was thin frost in the shaded spots. Sunlight hit the canyon rim and took its time dropping down into the bottom. It smelled like wet silt and cottonwood leaves starting to rot. My setup was simple and boring, the way safe solo boating should be. A small self-bailing raft with a frame stripped down for weight. PFD. Helmet clipped to the frame, even though I don't always wear it on low flows. Dry suit, 'cause October water is not forgiving. Throw bag, river knife, spare paddle, patch kit, hand pump, and a small first aid kit. I had a headlamp with fresh batteries, a backup light, and a satellite messenger in the chest pocket of my dry suit, because cell service in that canyon is a rumor. I also had a paper map in a waterproof sleeve. I trust GPS for quick reference, but I trust paper for reality. Paper doesn't lie when batteries fail. At the put-in, there was one other vehicle, an older SUV with a kayak rack. A guy was loading a creek boat off the back, moving slowly, like someone who knew he had all day. He looked up when I parked, gave me the quick nod boaters give each other, and went back to his straps. I said, "You running down too?" He glanced at my raft, then at the canyon. "Maybe halfway," he said. "Depends." That answer told me he wasn't new. New boaters have a plan they want to announce. Old boaters adjust. I asked him about flows. He shrugged. Low but clean. I told him I was doing the full stretch to the concrete takeout where the river meets the paved road. He paused a fraction too long, then said, "You know about the trash?" I laughed once, 'cause that's what you do when someone says something that sounds like local superstition. "What trash?" I asked. He tightened a strap and said, matter of fact, "Stuff that shows up where it shouldn't. Don't take it out. Don't bring it to camp. Leave it moving." He said it like a safety tip, not like a ghost story. That's why it stuck. I nodded, thanked him, and didn't argue. River people have all kinds of rules. Half are superstition, half are hard-earned. You don't know which until you've learned the painful way. I pushed off around 9:30. The first miles were easy. Gentle current, shallow riffles, the raft whispering over cobbles. The canyon walls were high enough to shade the river in long sections, and every time I hit shade the temperature dropped and the air smelled sharper. I kept my hands moving because cold hands are clumsy hands. I saw the usual October signs. A few mule deer tracks on a muddy bank, fresh because the mud still held edges. A heron lifting off downstream, wings beating slow and heavy. Cottonwood leaves spinning in eddies like coins. I was a couple hours in when I saw the first piece of debris. It was a child's shoe, bright blue, bobbing in a slow eddy near the left bank. It wasn't waterlogged. It floated high, like it hadn't been in the river long. That alone was odd. Shoes sink once they fill, but some kids' shoes have foam and they float for a while. I guided into the eddy and reached with my paddle to snag it. My first thought was practical. If a kid lost a shoe in the river, there might have been a kid in the river. People drown quietly. People lose things and then disappear. Debris can be evidence. I pulled the shoe onto my raft. It was small, toddler size, clean, no algae, no mud. The strap was intact, no bite marks. It smelled like plastic and river water. There was no other debris nearby. No cooler, no raft fragments, no clothes, just one clean shoe, drifting like it had been placed. I looked upstream and downstream. Nothing. I told myself it was from a family day trip. Someone dropped it at the put-in above. It drifted until it caught. Simple. I set it on the frame and kept moving. 20 minutes later, I saw a camp chair. Not a whole chair, part of one. A metal leg and a chunk of faded fabric, like it had snapped in a flood and been chewed by rocks. That kind of debris is normal after spring runoff. It gets caught in willows, then drops into the channel later. I didn't stop for that one. I just noted it. Another half hour, and I came to a longer pool section where the river slowed and deepened. The canyon narrowed. The walls turned darker. The water went from clear riffle to that green-brown stillness that hides depth. That's where I saw the dog collar. It was black nylon with a brass buckle, floating near the center line like it wanted to be seen. Collars float. That's normal. Dogs drown too. It happens on rivers, more than people admit. I paddled over and picked it up. There was a metal tag on it. No name, no phone number, just a manufacturer stamp. It read, "Manufactured March 17th, 2038. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds, letting my brain try to do its normal work. Find the mundane explanation. Counterfeit tag, I thought. Misstamped. Some novelty thing. A joke. But it wasn't a novelty. It wasn't a shiny tourist tag. It was a plain stamped piece of metal attached to a normal collar. I ran my thumb over the stamp. It wasn't printed. It was physically pressed. I said out loud, to nobody, "That's not right." I put the collar down and kept moving, and I tried to forget it. That's another survival habit. When something is wrong, but not dangerous yet, you don't fixate. Fixation makes you sloppy. By early afternoon, the canyon widened again, and the sun hit the water full. The temperature climbed into the 50s, maybe low 60s. Warm enough that I could unzip my dry suit neck, seal a fraction to vent without getting cold. The air smelled like warm sand and crushed sage. I pulled into a gravel bar for lunch around 1 in the afternoon. I ate jerky and a granola bar, drank water, and checked the map. I was on schedule. If I kept moving, I'd hit my planned camp by late afternoon and have enough daylight to set up and gather driftwood. I set the dog collar on a flat rock near the water line while I ate. I didn't want it inside the raft where it would be in my face. I told myself I'd take it out at the end and turn it in to whatever ranger station covered this stretch. Weird date or not, it was still evidence of something. When I finished eating, I shoved off again and didn't think about the collar. An hour later, I reached a bend where the river ran along a steep silt bank on the left. On the right was a line of tamarisk and cottonwood roots, exposed by erosion. The current pushed hard to the outside. I stayed center right, and there, pinned against the roots like it had been waiting, was the child's shoe. The same blue shoe, same strap, same scuff on the toe, same clean look. I knew it was the same because I had tied a small piece of orange flagging to it when I picked it up the first time. It was a habit from guiding marking something if you might need to identify it later. The flagging was still there, fluttering wetly. I felt a cold sensation in my chest that had nothing to do with the water temperature. I stopped paddling for a second and let the raft drift. The shoe should not have been ahead of me. It should have been on my raft. Or if I had lost it, it should have been behind me, carried downstream. I looked down at my frame. The spot where I had left the shoe was empty. I hadn't noticed it was missing because it wasn't important to my immediate safety. That's what made it worse. It had left without my attention. I reached out and grabbed it again. Water dripped off it. The flagging was soaked and stuck to the strap. I pulled it onto the raft and checked my gear like a man checking for theft. Everything else was where it should be. I told myself I must have set it down at lunch and forgotten. That would explain how it ended up back in the water. But then I remembered the collar. The collar I had set on the rock. The collar I had not picked up. I felt my stomach tighten because I knew what I would find before I checked. I paddled to a slow eddy near the right bank, beached the raft carefully, and walked back to the gravel bar where I'd eaten. The rock was still there. The spot where the collar had been was empty. There were no footprints in the gravel except mine. Gravel holds prints. It crunches and shifts and shows heel marks. There were no other tracks. The collar was gone. I stood there for a moment, looking at the water like it might tell me where the collar went. It didn't. I walked back to the raft, shoved off, and kept moving. I didn't like it, but I still had mundane explanations available. Wind could have knocked the collar in. The current could have carried it. I could have been sloppy. The shoe was harder, but even that you could explain if you really wanted to. Maybe I'd lost it earlier and didn't notice. Maybe there was another identical shoe. Kids' shoes are mass-produced. The problem was the flagging. That piece of orange flagging made it specific. By mid-afternoon, I caught up to the kayaker from the put-in. He was pulled over on a gravel bar, sitting on his boat, eating. He waved when he saw me. I beached near him and walked up. "You still running?" I asked. He nodded. "As long as it stays mellow." I held up the shoe. "You missing a kid?" I asked, joking in the way you joke when you don't want to sound serious yet. His expression didn't change much, but his eyes went to the flagging. "Did you pull that earlier?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. It came back. He stared at it for a few seconds, then said, "Told you about the trash." I felt my throat go dry. "You've seen this?" He nodded once. "Not that shoe, but other stuff. Same stuff. Shows up, you pull it, it shows up again. Sometimes upstream." "Upstream," I repeated. He shrugged like he hated saying it. "Yeah." I took the dog collar out of my pocket where I'd stuffed it earlier before it disappeared. I didn't have it anymore. I'd lost it. I wanted to show him the date stamp and see his reaction, but the collar was gone. "I had a collar too," I said. "Had a date on it that made no sense." He looked at me, and for the first time he seemed genuinely uncomfortable. Not scared in a dramatic way, just cautious. "Don't take things out," he said again. "Don't bring them to camp. If you find something, shove it back in and keep moving." "Why?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. He didn't say it was a spirit or a monster. He just said, "It's not yours." That was the closest thing to an explanation he offered. I said, "What's your name?" He hesitated, then said, "Tyler." I gave him mine. We shook hands, quick and practical. Tyler said, "Where are you camping?" "Sand bench above the bend, about 4 miles down," I said. "Same place I always do." He nodded slowly. "I'd camp higher." "Huh," I said. "Just higher," he repeated. "Above the waterline." That part was rational. Rivers rise, debris moves, cold air settles. Camping higher is always good advice. I said, "You going to take out early?" He looked downstream. "Maybe." I left him there and kept going, and I tried to tell myself this was just river weirdness. People see patterns. People anthropomorphize. But I was more alert now. Not paranoid. Just tuned in. As the sun dropped toward the canyon rim, the light changed. The water turned darker. Shadows stretched across the channel. The temperature dropped. I reached my planned camp around 4:30 in the afternoon. It was a sand bench with a line of cottonwoods and a flat area above the river. I'd camped there before. It felt familiar, which was comforting. I pulled the raft up, tied it to a root, and set up my small tent a safe distance back. I made a simple dinner, boiled water, and ate while the canyon cooled. The river sound changed at dusk. In daylight it's bright and busy. At dusk it becomes a steady, low rush, like a long exhale. The birds went quiet. The air smelled like damp sand and leaf rot. I checked my headlamp batteries, checked my satellite messenger. Sent a quick, camped safe ping to a friend because that's what you do solo. Not because you expect trouble, but because you don't want people guessing if you vanish. I should have shoved the shoe back into the water. Tyler had told me to. My own gut had told me to. I didn't. I kept it. Not out of greed. Out of stubbornness. Out of the belief that keeping evidence is smart. That was my mistake. When it got fully dark, I walked down to the waterline to rinse my pot. The headlamp beam cut a clean cone over the sand. The river reflected it in small sparkles. Everything outside the beam was black. I heard something in the water. Not a splash, not a fish jump, more like a soft, steady push, the way a log nudges along the bank. I turned my light and scanned. Nothing. I rinsed the pot, stood up, and started walking back to camp. That's when I saw the shoe. It was sitting on the sand above the waterline, placed like someone had set it there, toe pointing toward my camp. The flagging was dry. That detail hit me hard because it shouldn't have been dry. The shoe had been wet when I pulled it earlier. Drying takes time, and the air was cold. I walked closer, crouched, and touched it. The plastic was warm, like it had been kept near a heat source. I stood up slowly and looked at the river. The river made its steady sound. Nothing else moved. I took a step back, then another, and I kept my headlamp aimed at the waterline while I retreated. I wasn't running. Running in sand, in the dark, is how you trip and snap an ankle. I was moving the way you move when you're trying to stay in control. When I reached camp, I put the shoe in a dry bag and sealed it like it was contaminated. Then I sat with my back to a cottonwood and listened. I heard the river. I heard the occasional leaf scratch. I heard nothing else. That silence didn't comfort me. It felt like an acoustic dead zone, like the canyon was holding its breath. Around 10 at night, I crawled into my tent. I didn't sleep right away. I lay on my pad, listening to the river and checking my thoughts, trying to keep them rational. The river can play tricks. The canyon can amplify and distort. Animals move at night, and you don't always hear them. I repeated those facts like a mantra. Sometime after 11, I heard a sound that didn't fit. It was alongside the raft. A soft bump, then another, like something nudging the hull. I unzipped the tent quietly and stepped out, headlamp on low. The raft sat where I'd tied it. The river moved past, dark and quiet. I walked down the bank carefully. Sand slid under my boots. The air was colder near the water. The headlamp beam hit the surface, and I saw it. Not a shape, not a body, not something you can point to and say, that's it. I saw a moving absence, an area where the headlamp glare should have scattered in small ripples, but instead it was flat and dark, sliding along beside the raft like a shadow on water. It moved upstream. That's what made my brain stutter. Water moves downstream. Shadows on water move with current. This moved against it, slow and steady, without making a wake. I stood still. My breath came out loud in my ears. The absence kept moving, keeping pace with the raft, even though the raft was tied to shore. It slid along the length of the hull, stopped near the stern, then moved back toward the bow. No surface disturbance, no splash, no swirl, just movement. I told myself it was a trick of my light. A dark patch of silt, a submerged rock, something that made the surface look different. Then it rose, not fully, just enough that I saw 2 points catch light wrong. Not neon glow, not movie eyes, just reflections at a height that didn't match an otter or a fish. Too far apart, too steady. My muscles tightened. I didn't scream. I didn't drop the light. I did the only thing that made sense. I backed up. Slow, careful steps, keeping the beam on the water. I didn't turn my back. I didn't run. I moved like someone backing away from a bear. The reflection stayed for a moment, then dipped below the surface. The absence slid back into the dark. I reached the higher sand bench and didn't stop until I was at my tent. I grabbed the satellite messenger. My thumb hovered over the SOS. I didn't hit it. Not yet. Because what do you say? Something is swimming beside my raft without making a wake? That's not a dispatchable emergency until it becomes one. I sent a normal message instead to the same friend. Weird animal activity at camp. Might move early. Then I sat with my headlamp off and listened again. This time I heard something else. A soft scrape like plastic on sand. It was coming from behind my tent. I turned my headlamp on and swung it around. The child's shoe was there again, sitting 3 feet from my tent door, toe pointed directly at me. I hadn't taken it out of the dry bag. The dry bag was sealed and sitting inside the tent. I checked. The dry bag was still sealed. My hands started to sweat inside my gloves. That was the first real physical fear response I had, sweat, not panic. I didn't try to solve it. I didn't try to find a trick. I made a decision. I was leaving. Right then. In the dark. Not because that's ideal, but because staying meant letting whatever was happening continue learning my camp. I broke camp fast, but not sloppy. I shoved the tent into a bag, didn't bother drying it. I strapped gear to the frame by feel. I kept the headlamp beam moving in small arcs, checking the sand, the trees, the water. The river at night is a different animal. You can't read it the same. But this stretch was mostly flat water with a few simple riffles, and I'd rather navigate cold water than sit on a bench with something placing objects at my feet. I shoved off around 12:30 in the morning. The headlamp beam cut across the water. The canyon walls swallowed the light. My world shrank to a cone of visibility and the sound of my own breathing. Within minutes, I felt it again. That moving absence on the water, just outside the beam, keeping pace. I tried an experiment, the way you do when you need to confirm something without guessing. I stopped paddling. The raft slowed. The current carried it. My headlamp beam held steady on the same patch of water. The absence kept moving alongside at the same speed it had been moving before, like it wasn't tied to current at all. That's the detail I keep coming back to, because it's the one that violates physics in a way my brain still doesn't like. I started paddling again, harder now, not frantic, just committed. I aimed for the center tongue, avoided the bank where you can get snagged, and kept moving. I heard a sound from the water, not a splash, but a low, wet exhale, like something breathing just under the surface. Then I heard it again, closer. I didn't look sideways. I kept my light forward. I kept my paddle rhythm consistent. I told myself, get to the takeout, get to concrete, get to lights. That became my whole plan. About an hour before the takeout, the canyon widened enough that I could see a faint glow ahead, light pollution from the highway. That glow was the most comforting thing I've ever seen on a river. I came around a bend and saw the concrete takeout ramp, pale in my headlamp beam, angled down into the water like a promise. I paddled hard for it, guided into the eddy above the ramp, and scraped onto concrete. The moment the raft's tubes touched the ramp, the water beside me went still. Not calm still, like it was waiting. I dragged the raft up onto the ramp, muscles burning, boots slipping on wet concrete. I kept my headlamp on the waterline the whole time. The moving absence stayed at the edge of the ramp, right where concrete met water. It did not cross onto the ramp. It didn't surge. It didn't chase. It just held there, as if the boundary was real and non-negotiable. I got the raft fully onto concrete and stepped back. My boots were on dry ramp. The water was inches away. The absence drifted in the water, then slowly moved downstream, disappearing into the dark like it had never been there. I stood there under the faint highway glow, breathing hard, and realized my hands were shaking. Not from cold, from delayed adrenaline. A few minutes later, headlights rolled into the takeout lot. A pickup truck, Tyler's SUV behind it. Tyler got out, walked toward me, and stopped when he saw my face. "You ran it," he said. "I ran it," I said. He looked at the water, then back at me. "Did you take stuff out?" I didn't lie. "I took a shoe," I said. He nodded once, like that confirmed something he already knew. "Did it come back?" "Yes," I said. "More than once." Tyler exhaled through his nose. "That's why I told you." The guy from the pickup, an older man, maybe late 50s, looked at the waterline and said, "You see it?" "No," I said. He nodded like he believed me anyway. "Good, don't try." They helped me load the raft. We did it fast and quiet. No jokes, no storytelling, just three men doing a job. When the raft was strapped down and we were away from the water, the tension in my shoulders eased a fraction, like my body understood I'd crossed a line into a safer zone. At the ranger station later that morning, after I'd driven to where there was cell service and called in to report an off-hours emergency takeout, I spoke to a seasonal ranger who took my statement in a small office that smelled like wet wool and printer toner. He listened without interrupting. He asked practical questions: location, time, what debris, any missing persons reports I knew of. He didn't laugh, he didn't validate, he just wrote. When I mentioned the manufacture date on the collar, his pen paused. What date? He asked. I told him. He wrote it down carefully, then said, We've had reports, not official hazard reports, but reports. Of what? I asked. He looked at me and chose his words like he'd been trained to. Of debris that doesn't behave like debris, he said. That was the closest thing to confirmation I got from anyone with a badge. He filed it as an incident note, not a rescue. No sirens, no press release, just paperwork. And that was fine. I didn't want attention. I wanted a record in case someone else saw the same pattern and thought they were losing their mind. Here's the rule I take from it, and it's simple. If the river gives you an object twice, you don't keep it. You don't bring it to camp. You don't turn it into a souvenir or evidence. You shove it back into the current and you get to a hard boundary, concrete, pavement, lights before dark. By the time I realized the radio was keying in my exact all-clear pattern without my hand on the mic, I'd been watching the same figure at the same bearing for 30 days. The next scheduled relief was still 4 days out. I took that posting because it was simple work with clear rules. I'd spent most of my 20s in jobs where the goalposts moved every week. Contract crews, seasonal labor, bouncing between whatever paid. When the Forest Service position opened for a summer lookout on the Kaibab Plateau, it felt like stepping into something honest. See smoke, call it in, keep the log, follow the book. I wasn't naive about the solitude. I had done plenty of solo time backpacking, winter camping, long stretches of field work where you don't see another person for days. I'm comfortable being alone. I'm also comfortable admitting when something in the environment changes enough that you stop trusting your own assumptions. That's not fear. That's competence. My season started on June 3rd, 2019, and the tower was Swamp Point Lookout on the north side of the Kaibab. Not the most famous tower, not the easiest access. It sat high enough that you could see a long sweep of ponderosa, open meadows, and dark cuts where the ground dropped away into drainages. Elevation was a little over 8,000 feet. Nights were cold even in summer. Days could bake you if the wind died. My rotation was 10 days on, 4 days off. Supply runs were scheduled, but weather and staffing meant they didn't always hit on time. The tower itself was a steel structure with a cab on top and an exterior catwalk, stairs that rang under your boots, a trap door that clanged if you didn't hold it. Solar panels mounted on a rack, batteries in a vented box, and a radio console that looked like it had been installed sometime in the late 1990s and then ignored by technology ever since. The first week was what you'd expect, routine and quiet. I learned the horizon line and started naming landmarks in my head: peaks, ridge lines, the pale streak of a dirt road, a rocky bald that caught sunlight early. I practiced taking bearings with a sighting device bolted to the railing, and I got used to the way the wind talked to the structure. Steel towers don't creak like wood cabins. They ring and hum. Every day followed the same structure: morning weather obs, a scan with binoculars, midday check-in, afternoon scan, evening check-in, log entries. If you've never done a watch job, you might think it would make you paranoid. It does the opposite if you're built for it. You get calmer because your attention stops bouncing. You notice small changes without dramatizing them. A new dust plume on a road, a cloud building in the southwest, a tiny thread of smoke that could be a campfire or could be a lightning holdover. On June 6th, I got my first foreshadowing, and I almost missed it because it was buried in a stack of boring material. The tower had a logbook. Not my personal log, an official one that stayed with the tower. Every lookout wrote in it. Weather, events, maintenance issues, anything unusual. It was the sort of institutional memory that matters when you're a seasonal worker inheriting an old station. I flipped through it the first night for context. Most entries were exactly what you'd expect. Lightning to the east. Elk herd in meadow. Radio static. Supply drop delayed. A couple of small complaints about mice and one page where someone had drawn a crude map of where the best shade was on the catwalk in late afternoon. Then I found a line in an entry from a previous season, dated July 21st, 2016. It wasn't highlighted, it wasn't underlined, it was written like any other note. Do not acknowledge figure at bearing 172. Do not track with optics longer than necessary. No explanation, no story. Just that. I read it twice, then flipped forward and backward to see if it was referenced again. It was. Not often, not dramatic, just scattered mentions across years, always the same bearing. Different handwriting, different seasons. I did what a rational person does with something like that. I filed it under lookout superstition. People alone in towers invent rules. It's a coping mechanism. You give the wilderness a shape you can manage. I told myself that and went to bed. On my second rotation, around June 15th, I noticed the first thing at that bearing. I was scanning mid-afternoon, the way you do when the light is harsh and you're watching for thin smoke that can be easy to miss. The day was clear, wind from the west, mild haze over the far ridges. Through binoculars, at bearing 172 from the tower railing, I saw a vertical shape at the edge of the tree line where the open meadow met denser timber. It was far, too far to resolve detail. But it stood out because it didn't match the surrounding trunks. At that distance, lots of things can look like a person. A snag, a dark boulder, a shadow between trees. I stared for maybe 5 seconds, then looked away, then looked back. It was still there. I checked the log entry, almost as a joke, and confirmed the bearing. Then I wrote in my own log. Dark vertical at bearing 172. Possible snag. I didn't tell anyone. It didn't feel important. Over the next few days, I checked that bearing out of habit, like you check a knot you tied earlier to make sure it's still holding. The vertical shape was there every time I looked, always at the same boundary line between meadow and timber. It didn't move like a person walking. It didn't sway like a tree. It just existed. That still didn't scare me. It annoyed me. Unresolved visual anomalies annoy people who do observational work. On June 20th, I made a deliberate attempt to rule out normal explanations. I waited until different light, early morning, midday, late afternoon, when shadows shift. I looked through binos, and then through a spotting scope I'd brought higher magnification. I noted atmospheric distortion. I noted haze. The shape remained consistent. The simplest explanation became, it's a tree or a snag that happens to look like a standing figure. That was acceptable, until it wasn't. Around June 26, a storm line came through late afternoon. Distant thunder, high clouds, wind shifting. Nothing dramatic, but enough that the air got thick and the light went flat. During my scan, I checked bearing 172. The shape was still there. But the line beneath it, where it met ground, was different. The base looked narrower, like it was standing on a point rather than rooted. That's hard to describe without sounding like I'm reaching, so I'll say it plainly. It looked like it was balanced wrong. I watched for longer that time, maybe 20 seconds, trying to force my brain to label it as a snag. Then I saw it change position. Not walking, not stepping. One moment it was near one clump of trees. The next moment it was a few feet to the right, as if it had moved between cover positions without any in-between motion. If you've spent time watching distant objects through optics, you know the difference between I missed a step because I blinked and it wasn't there and now it is. This was the second. I lowered the binos and rubbed my eyes. Looked again. The shape held still, same dark vertical. I wrote in the log, possible observer at bearing 172. Movement unclear, likely optical artifact. That was my attempt to stay rational. The next day, June 27th, the supply driver came up. His name was Tyler. Different Tyler than the river story I told you earlier, common name. He was a seasonal employee too, driving supplies and water and propane to towers. He'd been doing it long enough that he didn't waste words, and he didn't pretend the roads were fun. He arrived mid-morning in a Forest Service pickup, dust cloud behind him. He climbed out with a cooler and a water jug, stretched his back, and looked up at the tower. "Morning," he called. "Morning," I called back. He didn't climb the stairs right away. He stood in the open area near the base, looking out at the tree line like he was checking something. I hauled the cooler up and met him halfway on the stairs. We did the usual handoff inventory check, radio check, quick chat about weather and any lightning starts. While we were on the catwalk, Tyler leaned on the railing and glanced toward the south. He didn't ask, "Do you see anything weird?" He didn't make it theatrical. He said, "You got something at 172." It wasn't a question. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with the confirmation that I hadn't invented it. "You've seen it," I said. Tyler didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the horizon. "Yeah. What is it?" I asked. He shrugged slightly. "Don't know. It's been there before." I waited. People like Tyler don't keep talking unless they have a reason. He said, "It watches towers. You'll see it move if you watch too long." That was too close to the logbook language for comfort. I said, "Why doesn't anyone write this up?" Tyler's mouth tightened. "Because there's nothing to write up. Saw a thing. They'll tell you you're tired." He wasn't wrong. I said, "Does it ever come closer?" Tyler finally looked at me. His eyes were flat and practical. "It stays at the timber," he said. "It doesn't cross the open." That should have been comforting. It wasn't. Boundaries can mean rules, and rules can mean territory. He left after an hour. Before he climbed down, he said almost casually, "Don't talk to it on the radio." I almost laughed. "I haven't." "Good," he said, and climbed down. That should have been my cue. It was. I still stayed. I still worked. The job wasn't optional, and the figure hadn't done anything overt. It just existed at that bearing. If you're waiting for a reason to justify leaving, you can always find a reason to stay. That's how people end up in bad situations. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern set in. Every day, during the afternoon scan, the figure was there at 172. Some days it looked like a trunk. Some days it looked like a person in shadow. Some days it seemed slightly taller than it should at that distance. I tried to treat it like a snag. I limited the time I watched it. I didn't use the scope for long. I didn't name it. But the longer the season went, the more it felt like it was establishing a routine the same way I was. Waiting for my scan. Waiting for my attention. On July 3rd, I found another entry in the tower log, older, from 2012, that I'd somehow skipped earlier. Different handwriting. Same message. Figure at 172 present nightly. Do not attempt contact. Radio keys, if acknowledged. That line made my skin prickle. Not because I believed in curses, because it described a specific behavior that involved equipment. Equipment doesn't do folklore. Equipment does physics and interference. I wrote a note to myself. Check radio logs if anything keys unexpectedly. That night, around 10:30, I heard the radio click. If you've never worked around a base station radio, you might not know the sound. There's the squelch static open, and then the little mechanical click of transmit. It's subtle. In the tower cab at night, it's loud because everything else is quiet. I was sitting at the small table eating instant noodles, headlamp off, listening to the wind. The radio was on, volume low. It clicked once like a mic keyed for half a second, then unkeyed. No voice. I stood up and looked at the console. The transmit light had blinked. That meant something had keyed the system. There's no reason for it to key on its own unless the mic is stuck or there's interference. I checked the mic. It was hanging on its clip. I pressed the push to talk. It felt normal. No sticky button. I keyed and unkeyed and watched the light respond. Normal. I wrote in the log. Radio keyed once at approximately 10:30 at night. No voice. Then I tried to sleep. The second key happened around 1 in the morning. Same click. Same half second, no voice. By the third time, around 3, my rational explanations were thinning. I wanted it to be interference, a distant unit on the same frequency, a lightning static discharge, but the pattern was too clean. Same duration, same click. On July 5th, I did a test. I turned the radio off at night. Not forever, just for a few hours. You're not supposed to, but I wasn't expecting a fire start at 3 in the morning on a calm night. The tower got quieter. The hum of electronics faded. I slept. At 1 in the morning, I woke up anyway. Not because of noise, because of that feeling you get when something in your environment changes and your body notices before your brain catches up. The tower felt still. I lay there, eyes open, in the dark cab, listening. Wind, faint. No wildlife sounds, no insects tapping the window, nothing. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs. Steel steps ring. They have a particular metallic thud when boots hit them. You can tell the difference between wind rattling a loose bolt and a person climbing. These were boots. Slow, measured. Not someone racing up. Not someone stumbling. Step, pause, step, pause. I sat up and looked toward the trapdoor, heart rate rising. I reached for my headlamp but didn't turn it on yet. Light can work against you if you're about to silhouette yourself. The footsteps stopped at the catwalk level. I heard nothing else. No voice calling up, no radio call, no knock. I stayed still for a full minute, listening. Then the footsteps resumed, circling the catwalk. One full loop, slow. My mind tried to do its job. Supply driver, ranger checking, lost hiker. None of those made sense. People don't climb a tower at 1 in the morning without calling first. And Tyler, the driver, would never do that. He was too practical. I reached for the radio out of reflex, then remembered it was off. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. I was alone in a tower with someone on the catwalk. I turned the headlamp on low and aimed it at the trapdoor seam. No shadow crossed. No hand reached. No attempt to open. The footsteps completed another loop, then stopped at a point near the south railing at bearing 172, if you wanted to be stupid about it. I stayed seated. I didn't open the trap. I didn't call out. If it was a person in need, they'd knock or call. If it wasn't, giving it my voice wasn't a good idea. After another minute, the footsteps moved to the stairs and went down. Step, pause, until they faded into the night. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the chair with my headlamp off, watching the dark corners of the cab, waiting for dawn. In the morning, I went down the stairs and checked the ground around the tower base. The soil there is a mixed packed dirt and pine needles, some gravel. Footprints show if someone walks around, especially with dew. There were elk tracks and my own. No fresh boot prints. That didn't make sense. If someone climbed the tower, there should have been evidence. I told myself maybe it was wind making the stairs ring, but I'd heard the cadence. I knew it wasn't wind. I wrote in the log. Possible footsteps on tower stairs at approximately 1 in the morning. No visual. No tracks observed at base. That entry felt ridiculous, even as I wrote it, which is part of why it mattered. I don't write things like that unless I'm certain I experienced them. I turned the radio back on during daylight and kept working. The next escalation came slowly, over days, in the way that makes you doubt yourself. The figure at 172 started appearing earlier. It used to show during afternoon scans. Now it was there in the morning too, faint in the distance. Then it started appearing in the evening, just before dusk, when the light goes thin and your eyes play games. I tried to stop looking. I did, for a while. But the problem with a fixed bearing is that it becomes part of how you orient yourself. You can't look at weather building in the south without glancing near it. You can't scan for smoke in that quadrant without seeing it in the corner of your view. On July 15th, it moved closer. Not closer in distance, closer in presentation. The silhouette resolved enough that I could tell it wasn't a tree. It had shoulders, or something that read as shoulders. It stood too upright and too narrow at the waist for a snag. Its head position was wrong, tilted forward in a way that made it look like it was looking up toward the tower, not just standing. I watched for less than 10 seconds and forced myself to look away. That night, the radio keyed again. Only this time, it didn't just click. It transmitted my all clear pattern. Every lookout has little habits. We're supposed to do formal check-ins, but you develop cadence. Mine was a 2-beat pause before I spoke, then a clean swamp point, all clear in the same tone, because I liked consistency. It helps dispatch. The radio keyed, and I heard, in the speaker, the exact timing of my own check-in, 2 beats of silence, then the words, "Swamp Point, all clear." It was my voice. Not perfect, but close enough that my throat went dry. Then it unkeyed. I stood there with my hand on the mic, not pressing it, staring at the console like it had betrayed me. I didn't answer. I didn't say, "Who is this?" I didn't say anything. I picked up the mic, checked the cord, checked the clip, checked for any stuck buttons. Nothing. I wrote the incident down in the log with full detail. Date, time, what I heard, duration, everything. The next morning, I called my supervisor on the scheduled check-in line, not on the radio. I kept it professional. I told her we had intermittent self-keying and possible interference. I requested a technician. She asked the normal questions. Was there weather? Was the antenna loose? Was there any static? Did I check the mic? I said yes to all. I did not tell her it sounded like my voice. Not yet. You don't lead with the part that gets you labeled. A technician was scheduled for my next rotation change. Until then, I was alone with a radio that could speak as me. From that point on, the tension in the tower wasn't about seeing the figure. It was about the idea that something had learned the patterns that kept me connected to the world. It started small. A half-second key at odd hours. A brief burst of static. A click during a moment of silence. Then it began using my cadence more often, like it was practicing. On July 23rd, during a routine evening check-in, dispatch responded slower than normal. I asked if they copied. The dispatcher said, "Swamp Point, we already have you logged all clear." My mouth went dry. "I haven't checked in yet," I said. There was a pause. Then the dispatcher said, carefully, "We received your all clear 3 minutes ago." I could hear the confusion in her voice. Not fear. Procedure. Confusion. I said, "That wasn't me." Silence. Then she said, "Copy. Stand by." A few minutes later, she came back and told me to hold radio transmissions unless needed for actual smoke reports until a tech could check the system. She kept her voice neutral. That's what professionals do when something doesn't fit. I sat in the cab after that call, staring at the mic. The feeling wasn't dramatic terror. It was a quiet dread, like realizing your compass needle is spinning and you don't have a second one. That night, I heard the footsteps again. Same cadence, same slow loop of the catwalk. This time I didn't just listen. I forced myself to confirm. I stood, moved to the cab window, and looked out without turning on my headlamp. The night was dark but not pitch. There was a thin moon and a field of stars, and the open meadow below the tower held faint shapes. The catwalk railing should have been empty. Instead, I saw a darker mass moving along the outer edge, just beyond the window frame, tall, narrow, with motion that didn't match a human's normal gait. It didn't bob. It didn't shift weight the way boots do on steel grating. It glided in measured steps, the stride length too long for the speed. When it passed the window, I got a brief sense of clothing or texture, but it didn't sit on a frame the way a jacket sits. The shoulders were wrong. The fabric, or whatever it was, didn't move in the wind. It completed the loop and stopped at the south side. Then it did something that made my stomach clench. It tilted its head upward, toward the cab window, like it knew exactly where I was standing. I stepped back from the window, without thinking, controlled but fast. The radio clicked. Then my own voice came through again, low and calm. "Open the trap." I froze. Not because I wanted to, because the command hit the part of my brain trained to respond to radio orders. Lookouts follow instructions. That's the job. But the voice was wrong in one subtle way. The cadence was mine, but the emphasis wasn't. It knew the shape of the words, not the intent behind them. I didn't answer. The voice repeated, slightly delayed. Open the trap. I stayed back from the window. I kept my breathing quiet. I didn't move toward the door. I didn't move toward the mic. The footsteps started again, and this time they weren't circling. They were approaching the trapdoor. Step, pause, step, pause, directly beneath me. The trapdoor handle rattled once, not violently, just enough to let me know it could touch it. Then the footsteps stopped. The radio clicked again. Swamp Point. My voice said, all clear. A perfect imitation of the phrase dispatch expected, like it was trying to use my compliance against me. I sat down slowly, keeping my eyes on the trapdoor seam. My hands were cold, and I could feel my pulse in my fingers. I did the only thing that still felt like control. I turned on every light in the cab overhead, desk lamp, everything. The cab became a bright box on a dark tower. The footsteps didn't stop. They moved away, looping again, staying on the catwalk at the edge of my light spill. It did not try to enter. It did not force the trap. It did not climb into the cab. It stayed where the tower ended and open air began. That was the boundary. And it mattered, because it meant the thing wasn't just a random predator. Predators test. They push. This didn't push. It pressed at the limit and waited. That night lasted forever in my head, but in reality it was a few hours. The sky in the east eventually softened. Birds started up cautiously. The wind shifted. At dawn, the footsteps stopped. No dramatic exit, just absence. I did not go down to check for tracks. I waited until full daylight and then went down only to check the radio antenna mount, because if a technician came later, I wanted to be able to say I had checked the obvious. There were still no boot prints, no scuffs on the stairs, no sign of a person climbing. When Tyler, the supply driver, came again on July 26, he took one look at my face and said, "It came up." I didn't answer right away. I didn't want to say it out loud. Saying it out loud makes it a report. Reports change your life. Tyler said, "You didn't open the trap, did you?" "No," I said. He nodded once, like he'd expected that. "I heard it keying," he said, "down at the base last time." Radio squawked like someone was talking. That was the secondary confirmation I needed more than I wanted. Tyler wasn't a storyteller. If he said he heard it, he heard it. He climbed the tower with me in daylight, and we stood on the catwalk together. He pointed toward 172 and said, "There." I raised binoculars and saw the figure at the tree line again, faint in daylight but present. Tyler looked through my binos and lowered them slowly. "It's closer," he said. I said, "You still think it won't cross the open?" Tyler's eyes stayed on the meadow. "It hasn't yet." "Haven't yet isn't the same as won't," I said. He didn't argue. The technician arrived the next day, a guy named Mr. Ortega, no nonsense, sunburned forearms, tool bag, calm demeanor. He checked the antenna, the cables, the mic. He ran tests. He replaced a connector. He did everything a professional does when troubleshooting. He found nothing that explained voice transmissions from an unkeyed mic. He did find something else. The radio log showed transmissions at times when the tower's console was off, including one during my 4-day break when the tower was unstaffed. Mr. Ortega didn't say that's impossible. He just stared at the printout longer than he should have. Then he said, "We're replacing the console." "Now?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not now. We don't have one on hand. We'll put in a request." Bureaucracy moves slow. I asked him if he'd ever seen anything like it. He hesitated, then said, "I've seen interference. I've seen stuck mics. I've seen repeaters do weird things. I haven't seen this pattern." He didn't have another word. He packed up and left. I stayed because the rotation schedule stayed, because nobody said I could leave, and because leaving without authorization would mean losing the job and maybe losing future work. But my behavior changed. I stopped using the radio except for mandatory check-ins, and when I did, I made my cadence deliberately different. I changed the phrasing. I used full formal language instead of my habit. I didn't want it learning me. I stopped looking at 172 at predictable times. I varied when I scanned, when I ate, when I moved around the cab. I didn't want to be a metronome. It still found me. On August 2nd, day 30 of that rotation, the figure appeared not just at tree line, but slightly inside, between trunks, where it could hide and still be visible. And when I looked through binoculars, I saw something that made my throat go dry. It wasn't looking toward the tower anymore. It was angled slightly away, as if it was watching the approach road, like it knew when Tyler would come, like it knew supply schedules. That's what pushed me over the edge. Not the figure itself, but the implication of patience and pattern recognition. That night the radio keyed again, but instead of my all clear, it played a different pattern, my morning weather report cadence. The exact pause before I said winds and the slight clearing of throat I sometimes did. Small details. It was better than before. I didn't respond. I didn't correct it. I didn't tell dispatch I was hearing it. I sat in the lit cab and watched the trap door and waited for dawn. The boundary held. It did not come in. It did not climb through the trap. It stayed at the edge of the catwalk and the tree line and the meadow. When relief finally arrived on August 6th, 4 days later than I wanted to endure, I didn't tell the new lookout everything. I told him the official parts. Radio interference, figure at 172, don't use predictable cadence, log everything. I left out the trapdoor command. I left out my own voice. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I didn't want to hand someone else the full weight before they'd even unpacked. I drove straight to the district office and requested a meeting with the supervisor. I brought the logbook, not just my pages, all of it. I sat with a ranger and my supervisor and a safety officer in a fluorescent lit room with maps on the wall and a copy machine humming in the corner. I laid the logbook down and opened it to the entries across years that mentioned 172. They read it quietly. No jokes, no eye rolls. The safety officer asked me, "Did you ever leave the cab at night?" "No," I said. "Did you respond to any unknown transmissions?" he asked. "No," I said. "Did it ever cross into the open meadow?" he asked. "No," I said. He nodded slowly, then asked a question that told me he'd taken this seriously. "Did you change your patterns after you noticed it?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "And it adjusted." That's what I told them. That's what I could prove. They filed it under equipment anomaly and potential unauthorized access to tower dollars. That's what the form categories allowed. They opened a maintenance ticket. They marked the tower for a console swap and antenna inspection. They did one more thing that didn't appear in any official email. They removed the older logbook pages that reference 172 and made copies for an internal file. Then they put a clean new logbook in the tower. When I asked why, my supervisor said, "We don't want seasonal staff spiraling." That was her rational explanation. It might have been true. I didn't argue. I took my personal log copies and kept them. I finished the season on a different assignment. I never went back to that tower. This was the last night we ever saw the pilot's headset in federal evidence custody. By sunrise, it was sitting on the steps of our trailer like someone had returned it dry, clean, and already tagged with a woman's name that didn't belong anywhere in that crash file. I'm an NTSB field investigator. I've worked enough wrecks to know what people want the story to be. A neat chain of causes, a final mistake, an answer that fits in a headline. Most crashes don't give you that. They give you fragments. Metal bent in ways that only make sense when you remember speed. A smell you never forget, burnt composite, spilled fuel, wet earth, and a pile of paperwork that follows you home. I have also learned that the most dangerous part of this work isn't the wreckage itself. It's the environment around it, steep terrain, weather, altitude, and the slow fatigue that makes competent people do sloppy things. That's why we run grids. That's why we tag every piece. That's why we don't improvise. The case that led to Incident 7-2 Chusca, our internal shorthand, started on September 29, 2021. A small single-engine aircraft went down in the Chusca Mountains on the New Mexico-Arizona line, north of Gallup, west of Farmington, in a patch of country that doesn't care whether you're federal or local. It's high, forested, and cut with drainages that make access a problem even in good weather. The initial report was typical: aircraft overdue, last radar contact, intermittent, ELT, signal weak, Local authorities and tribal police were involved early because the terrain and jurisdiction demanded it. By the time my team got the assignment, the wreck had been located mostly because a rancher caught a faint smoke smear against dark timber and called it in before the weather swallowed it. I arrived 3 days later with another investigator, Nate Harlow. Nate was sharp and methodical, the kind of guy who could look at a twisted wing spar and tell you what direction the force came from. He was also younger than me and still had that early career confidence that systems generally work. He trusted process. Most of the time he was right. We staged out of a small cleared lot used by a local utility crew, flat enough for trailers, close enough to a dirt access road that our trucks could reach it without chaining up every time the weather turned. Our mobile trailer was the standard federal setup, a cramped metal box with a desk, evidence lockers, generator hum, and enough fluorescent light to make everything feel clinical even when the world outside was mud and pine. Our daily routine was locked in, the way it always is on a prolonged site. Morning briefing, safety check, grid assignments, evidence collection, photographs with scale, notes in the official format, chain of custody, evening debrief, then the part nobody sees, the slow rebuild of the story from the pieces. The crash site itself was a steep, timbered slope at around 8,000 feet, mixed conifer, ponderosa, and spruce, where the ground was damp and black with duff. The wreckage field was tight, which usually suggests a high-energy impact rather than a breakup. The nose section was fragmented. The tail was twisted and partially separated. There was no post-impact fire, which in that terrain was a mercy. We worked with local authorities and respectfully with tribal representatives. That meant being careful, being transparent, and not treating the land like our office. We did not take shortcuts with access. We did not step where we didn't need to step. We kept our footprint tight. On day one at the site, nothing felt wrong in the supernatural sense. It felt wrong in the normal sense. A man was dead. A family would get a call, and we were about to spend weeks in the woods in cold air that smelled like wet bark and fuel. We started with the basics, site photos, orientation, a rough diagram. Nate called out coordinates, and I marked them. We placed flags at the edges of the debris field. We documented what we touched and what we didn't. By the end of that first day, we had the main structural pieces tagged and the obvious evidence collected. We also had a list of what was missing. The pilot's headset was missing. That matters because on small aircraft, headsets are personal equipment, but they're also part of communication. They can help us understand radio calls, audio environment, sometimes even whether the pilot was struggling with interference. It's not always crucial, but you note it. We found the cockpit jacks. We found the cords torn. We found fragments of ear cups. But the headset itself, the band, the mic boom, was not in the wreckage field. Nate shrugged. Ejected, he said. Could be downhill. Could be collected by someone before we got here, I said. That was a normal possibility. Locals find crashes. People pick up souvenirs. It's illegal, but it happens. We expanded the grid downhill and searched. We didn't find it. We logged it as unrecovered and moved on. That night, October 2nd, 2021, we were back at the trailer by 7 in the evening. Temperature had dropped into the 30s. Breath showed. The generator made a steady low thrum that became background noise if you let it. The sodium yard light outside the trailer threw a harsh cone of light on the gravel and left the rest of the lot in darkness. Nate and I sat at the desk and began the first pass through the recovered avionics and the cockpit voice recorder. On small general aviation aircraft, the term CVR can be misleading. Sometimes it's not a full cockpit voice recorder like you'd see in transport category aircraft. Sometimes it's an audio panel recording, or a device capturing intercom and radio. In this case, the aircraft did have recorded audio from the final segment. Nate set up the playback. We both wore headphones. We'd learned the hard way that listening to crash audio out loud in a small trailer makes it impossible to stay objective. Headphones keep it contained. The audio quality was decent. You could hear the engine. You could hear airflow changes. You could hear the pilot's breathing when he leaned closer to the mic. It wasn't cinematic. It was just real. The first minute was routine, the pilot talking to ATC, confirming position, nothing strange. Then, about 90 seconds from the end, the pilot said a name. Maria, he said, and his voice shifted. Not fear, more like surprise and focus, like he'd seen something he didn't expect. Nate paused the playback. Who's Maria? He asked. Could be a passenger, I said, though we both knew there was no passenger listed. Could be someone on the radio. Nate rewound a few seconds and played it again. The pilot said, Maria, stop. And then the audio picked up a faint sound behind his words. Not a voice on the radio, not engine. Something softer, like someone speaking off mic. Nate's eyes flicked to me. Is that a second voice? He asked. I listened again, leaning into the audio like proximity would help. The sound was there, but it was too low and too distorted to confirm as a human voice. It could have been cockpit noise. It could have been the pilot shifting. It could have been radio bleed. But then the pilot said, clearer, Maria, you're not. He didn't finish. There was a sound like a strap moving, a sharp breath, then the impact sequence. Nate stopped the playback and sat back. Empty cockpit, he said, like he was stating the obvious to anchor himself. No passenger, no second person. Yeah, I said. We did what investigators do. We didn't leap to conclusions. We started building a list of normal explanations. The pilot could have been talking to a memory. People do that under stress. People call out loved ones. People talk to themselves. A name can be a coping mechanism. The pilot could have been hearing something on the radio, a bleed in from another frequency, another aircraft, a station ID, a woman's voice from a nearby transmitter. The pilot could have had a phone on the seat with navigation audio or a recorded message that included a name. Not likely, but possible. We pulled the pilot's background file, single pilot, no known issues, weather marginal but not extreme, no alcohol, no known mental health flags. A normal guy who made a normal mistake, if it ended up being that. But the name Maria stayed in the air of that trailer long after we took the headphones off. The next morning, October 3rd, we were back on site by 8. The trees were wet with dew. The ground was slick. We ran the grid again, collecting smaller debris. Nate worked the uphill edge. I worked the center line. Around mid-morning, I heard Nate call my name. Not loud, not panicked, just that tone you use when you want a second set of eyes. I walked over. He was standing near a small cluster of fragments, holding his GPS unit. Look at this, he said. On the ground, in a patch of damp duff, where our boots had already compressed the soil the day before, there were fresh-looking impressions. Not animal tracks, not clear boot prints either. More like elongated depressions, spaced too far apart to be casual steps. They were heading through the wreckage field in a line that matched the path we'd walked on day one when we laid out the initial flags. That's our track line, Nate said. It is, I agreed. Except we didn't walk it this morning, he said. We started on the north edge. He was right. We had walked a different grid today. These depressions were where we'd walked yesterday, but they looked newer than yesterday's would look. Yesterday's prints would have softened overnight with dew and leaf fall, but they wouldn't have sharpened. Nate crouched and pointed. See how the duff is pushed down but not scuffed. No toe drag. No heel strike. I didn't like it, but I still tried to keep it normal. Could be settling, I said. Duff rebounds weird. Overnight moisture. Nate shook his head slightly. Not like this. We photographed it and moved on. We logged it as site disturbance, unknown origin. That's the professional way of saying I can't explain this. Later that afternoon, I heard it for the first time. A whisper, not a voice in my ear, not a word in my head, a sound in the environment at the edge of hearing. It happened near dusk, when the sun dropped behind the ridge, and the timber went dark fast. Nate was uphill, calling out tag numbers for a piece of cowling. I was near the center of the field, kneeling beside a section of paneling, writing on a tag. I heard a soft ma like the start of the name, drawn out, not spoken with human cadence. I froze with my pen in the air. I listened. Nothing. The wind moved through needles. A branch creaked. Normal. I told myself it was my brain pulling from the audio we'd listened to. Priming. Suggestion. That's what humans do. We latch onto a detail, and then we hear it everywhere. I didn't tell Nate. I didn't want to spread contamination into his perception. We finished the day and returned to the trailer. That night, Nate asked if we should listen to the audio again. I said, not tonight. He looked at me, surprised. I kept my voice practical. We'll do it in daylight, with a fresh brain. No reason to chew on it when we're tired. That was true. It was also self-protection. The next escalation came from the paperwork, not the woods. On October 5th, our agency liaison forwarded us a missing person bulletin from 12 years earlier. It was a woman named Maria Reyes. She'd gone missing near the Chusca Range in 2009. The bulletin was old, mostly stale leads, but the name hit us like a physical thing. Nate printed it and set it on the desk without speaking. I read it. Age, height, last seen location. A small photo, grainy. Nate said, "That's a hell of a coincidence." "It might be," I said. "What are the odds?" he asked. I didn't answer, 'cause I didn't know. The name Maria is common. Reyes is common. The Southwest is full of Marias and Reyeses. But the geographic overlap and the timing felt too neat. We did the rational thing. We called the agency contact and asked if the missing person had any link to aviation, any known pilot, any tie to the crash pilot. The answer came back. No known connection. Nate looked at me and said, "So why would he say her name?" "He could have known her," I said, "privately, not documented." "Or he could have heard it," Nate said. "In the cockpit?" I asked. Nate didn't answer. He didn't need to. That evening, the whisper happened again, this time clearly enough that I could not write it off as imagination. We were walking out of the site, heading back down the access path to the vehicles. The light was fading. The air was colder. The duff under our boots had that damp, springy feel. Behind us, from the wreckage field, I heard, "Maria." One clean utterance. Not loud, not shouted, more like someone speaking a name into still air. Nate stopped mid-step. I stopped too. We both turned at the same time. That was the secondary witness moment, the one that matters. Because I didn't have to ask if he heard it. His posture told me. His face had changed. The skeptical, analytical look was gone for a second, replaced by a tight alertness. "You heard that?" I said, not as a question. Nate swallowed. "Yeah." We stood there, both looking back into the timbered slope where the wreckage sat in shadow. There was no movement we could see, no figure silhouetted, just trees and dark. Nate said, "Wind?" "Wind doesn't say names," I said. He nodded once, like he hated agreeing. We didn't run. We didn't scream. We walked faster to the vehicles, eyes scanning, staying controlled. The way you move when you don't want to admit you're changing your behavior because you don't want to give it power. When we got back to the trailer lot, the generator hum and the sodium light made everything feel safer. That's a boundary in the human brain. Infrastructure equals control. We debriefed with the rest of the team. We did not mention the voice. We mentioned the site disturbances and the unrecovered headset. We stayed in policy. That night, I woke up at about 2 a.m. because the trailer felt wrong. Not haunted, not cold, wrong in a sensory way. The generator was still running. The light outside still burned, but the usual background noises, the distant insects, a branch tapping the side of the trailer, were absent. It felt like the air had been vacuumed. I lay still, listening. Then I heard footsteps on gravel outside the trailer. Slow. Even. A person walking with intention, not a raccoon scampering. I got up, pulled on my boots, and looked out the trailer window without turning on the interior light. The lot was empty, except for our trucks and the equipment. The footsteps continued, circling the trailer, staying just beyond the pool of light. Nate was asleep in the other bunk. I didn't wake him yet, not until I had something real. The footsteps stopped at the trailer steps. Then there was a soft thud, like something placed on metal. I waited. No knock, no voice, no attempt to enter. After a minute, the footsteps moved away again, slow, circling, then fading into the dark beyond the light. I waited another minute, then cracked the trailer door and stepped out into the cold. The steps were empty. No package, no animal, nothing. I checked the ground around the steps with my flashlight. Gravel and dust. Tire tracks. No clear boot prints, because gravel is hard to read unless it's wet. Still, you can usually see scuffs. I saw none. I went back inside and lay down without sleeping. In the morning, I told Nate about the footsteps. He didn't laugh. He didn't say, "I imagined it." He said, "Did you check the steps?" "Yeah," I said. "Nothing there." He nodded, then said something that made my skin prickle. "Then why do I feel like something is going to show up?" he said. That was the feeling, the expectation, like the environment was teaching us to anticipate an action. On October 9th, 3 weeks into the investigation, the site itself changed. We'd been working the same grid patterns for days, methodical, slow, pieces collected, larger components staged for removal. The wreckage field was thinning. That morning, as we hiked up, Nate stopped and pointed. "Look," he said. There, in the center of the debris field where the cockpit section had been, something sat on a flat rock like it had been placed. A woman's scarf. Thin fabric, faded red, with a floral pattern. It was clean, not torn, not snagged, no mud. It did not belong at a crash site that had been exposed to weather for weeks. Nate looked at me. "We didn't put that here." "No," I said. "We photographed it. We bagged it with gloves. We treated it like evidence. That's what you do when you don't understand something. You lock it into procedure." The scarf smelled faintly of soap. Not pine, not fuel, soap. Nate said, "This is staged." "By who?" I asked. He didn't answer. That afternoon, we listened to the audio again in daylight. We ran it through filters. We isolated frequencies. We tried to see if there was a radio bleed that could have carried a woman's voice saying something that the pilot interpreted as Maria. We found nothing definitive. But the whisper in the woods continued. Always near dusk. Always just one utterance. Never a conversation. Maria. Like a call. Like a test. The climactic moment came on October 15th. On a day that started normal and ended with me wishing I'd trusted my instincts sooner. The weather had turned. A low system moved in. The clouds sat low on the ridges. The air was damp. Temperature hovered around 40 in the day, dropping fast as evening approached. We had planned a final sweep before removing the last major components. It was a long day. Everybody was tired. That's when mistakes happen. Around 5 in the evening, we were still on the slope, finishing a photo series. Dusk came early under cloud cover. The timber went dark like someone dimmed a switch. I looked at my watch and said, "We're cutting it close." Nate nodded. 5 more minutes. That's the kind of sentence people regret later. We finished the last photos and started walking out, single file down the path because it's narrow and slippery. Halfway down, Nate stopped so abruptly I almost walked into him. "What?" I said. He pointed uphill, back toward the wreckage field. A figure was walking in the debris field, not running, not wandering, walking a grid. A straight line across the field, then a turn, then another straight line back. Exactly the pattern we used on day 1 when we ran the initial search. It was wearing something that looked like a jacket, dark, hood up or head down. Hard to tell in dim light. What made my stomach drop was not just that a person was in our secured sight. It was how it moved. The stride length was too long for the speed. The upper body didn't sway with the terrain. It moved like a shape pretending to be a person. Nate whispered, "That's not one of ours." "No," I said. I raised my flashlight and swept it across the field. The beam caught the figure's legs for a second. The boots were dry. We'd been working in damp duff and mud. Our boots were wet. The ground was wet. Dry boots meant either it hadn't walked through the same terrain or it wasn't interacting with it. The figure stopped at the edge of the beam, as if it had been waiting for that moment. Then it turned its head, not like a person turning to look, too far, too smoothly, like the joints allowed more than they should. I felt my chest tighten. Nate's breathing went shallow. The figure lifted its hand slow, deliberate, and pointed toward our trailer lot, downhill, the direction of infrastructure and light. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't waving. It was directing. In a normal scenario, you'd call it in, you'd challenge, you'd identify, you'd say, "This is a federal site. Step away." But the wilderness has a way of making you weigh risk fast. We were two investigators in fading light on a steep slope. If that was a person with bad intent, confronting uphill is how you get hurt. We backed down the path without turning our backs fully, moving carefully, fast enough to leave, slow enough not to fall. As we moved, I heard the whisper again, closer than ever. Not from the wreckage field, from the timber beside the path. "Maria." It was at shoulder height, near, too near for wind to carry from the field. Nate's head jerked toward the sound. He almost stepped sideways toward it, like his body wanted to orient to the voice. I grabbed his sleeve and pulled him back onto the path. "Don't," I said. Short, firm. His eyes were wide. He nodded once, hard. We made it to the vehicles in near dark. The trailer lot sodium light was the best thing I'd seen all day. The generator hum sounded like safety. We got inside the trailer and locked the door behind us. Not because locks stop everything, but because locks are a boundary humans can understand. Nate said, "Did you see the boots?" "Yes," I said. He swallowed. "How were they dry?" "I don't know," I said, but it wasn't for us to solve out there. We sat at the desk, breathing, letting adrenaline drain. Then I heard a soft thud on the trailer steps. Nate's head snapped toward the door. I stood slowly, moved to the door, and looked through the small window. Nothing visible. The steps were just outside the window's view. I opened the door 2 inches, enough to see down without exposing myself fully. There, centered on the top step like it had been carefully placed, was the pilot's headset. The band intact, ear cups intact, mic boom intact. Dry. Clean. It should have been impossible. If it had been in the woods for 3 weeks, it would have smelled like damp plastic and pine. If it had been in the wreckage field, it would have been dirty. If someone had stolen it and returned it, it would still show some sign of handling. This looked like it had been taken out of a box, and attached to the cord with a small strip of tape was a handwritten label. "Maria." Nate came up behind me. He saw it and made a sound I'd never heard him make, half breath, half disbelief. "Don't touch it with bare hands," I said automatically, because my brain retreated to procedure as a shield. We gloved up, we photographed it in place, we documented chain of custody like it was any other evidence. But my hands were shaking slightly as I lifted it into an evidence bag, because the logic of the scene was collapsing. The boundary mattered too. It had placed it on the trailer step, right at the edge of our lit, occupied space. It had not brought it inside. It had not knocked. It had not confronted us. It stopped at the threshold and made the delivery like that was the limit. That night, Nate didn't sleep. He sat at the desk, staring at the bagged headset like it might speak. I listened to the generator. I listened to the wind. And I listened for footsteps on gravel. They came once, around 2 a.m, slow circle, pause at the steps, then gone. No further thuds. No further gifts. By morning, the air felt normal again. Not safe, just normal. Like whatever had pressed up to the trailer boundary had decided it had accomplished something. The aftermath was bureaucracy wearing a serious face. We reported the headset recovery up the chain immediately. Our supervisor asked the expected questions. Who found it? When? Where? Who had access to the lot? Were there cameras? We had cameras. The lot camera showed nothing. No figure approaching the steps. No hand placing the headset. Just the headset appearing between frames in a time gap where the camera's motion trigger hadn't activated. IT blamed a trigger sensitivity issue. That's plausible. Motion cameras miss things. They do. But it didn't explain why the headset was dry and clean. The tribal liaison requested to be present when we discussed anything tied to the Maria name, which we respected. We did not treat the missing person bulletin as ours to solve. We shared what we had, and we kept our mouths shut about theories. Nate dug deeper into the missing case on his own time, the way curious investigators do. He found that Maria Reyes had last been seen near a dirt access road not far from where our trailer lot was now staged 12 years earlier. A different context, a different event, same geography. Was it a coincidence? Maybe. But the whisper on the site had used her name before we'd ever read the bulletin. That was the part we couldn't place. On October 20th, we ended the field portion of the investigation. Evidence removed, site cleaned, final photos taken. The wreckage was released per procedure. On the last evening, as we packed the trailer, I stood on the steps and looked out into the dark timber beyond the sodium light. I didn't see a figure. I didn't hear a name. But I felt that same pressure at the edge of light, like an audience just beyond your vision. I went inside, locked the door, and finished packing. If you want a clean explanation, I don't have one. The official report stayed inside normal lanes. Weather, terrain, pilot decision-making, possible spatial disorientation. The Maria detail didn't make the final probable cause because it couldn't be substantiated as an operational factor. It sat in the file like a splinter. Privately, I took one practical lesson. I now treat like policy for myself. In that region, Chuska, the adjacent high country, when the light starts to go, you stop working. You don't squeeze in 5 more minutes. You don't chase a last photo. You pack and you move while you can still see your own footing. And if a crash site starts giving you back items you never recovered, especially clean, dry items placed at your steps, you don't treat it like luck or a prank. You treat it like a warning that the boundary is being tested, and you leave on your terms, not after dark decides for you.